Welcome to our third of 4 work group meetings on zero emission infrastructure for medium and heavy duty vehicles. My name is Annalisa Bevan. I'm the zero emission vehicle infrastructure specialist for the California Air Resources Board. I'm going to walk through some background and sort of logistics and setup for today's meeting. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. As many of you know, CARB is developing the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, which would require fleets to transition to zero emission trucks. Coupled with the Advanced Clean Trucks regulation, this rulemaking will make pivotal contributions to achieving our health-based air quality standards, reducing near roadway exposure to transportation emissions for communities burdened by diesel toxic air contaminants, and reaching our climate change emission reduction goals. In the course of developing this regulation, issues have been coming up around infrastructure needs for this transition. We've held a forum on infrastructure. We've taken comments at a number of workshops and work group meetings as part of the regulatory development process. And from this, it's clear we need a platform for a more focused conversation about infrastructure, where we can spend more time hearing from stakeholders about their concerns and questions, and bring our partner agencies to the table to have a complete conversation about what's happening in the state to support zero emission vehicle infrastructure. So the purpose of these work group meetings is to inform and support the Advanced Clean Fleets rulemaking, but we also want to foster dialogue between stakeholders about infrastructure issues and solutions more broadly. We want to connect the work of the ACF rulemaking with the important work of our sister agencies, and we want to identify actions and ongoing discussions that will support the transition to ZEVs. We're holding these meetings in a somewhat different format, and I've described this in the 2 previous meetings, but in case we have new participants, I'll cover this. We've asked participants to identify if they'd like to be in a speaking role during this meeting using a survey format, and we've selected participants through that process to be work group members or panelists. We're looking for a robust and constructive conversation about the topics on our agenda today, and we invite all attendees to participate via the Q&A chat box. If you weren't selected to be a work group member today, it may be because more than one person in your organization applied to be a panelist, or you've identified areas of interest that didn't match today's topics as well as other meetings, or we had broad representation from your sector and we needed to keep the panelist total manageable. Either way, your voice is important to us, and we welcome your input through the Q&A, and we can discuss setting up one-on-one meetings if needed. We're recording today's meeting, and we'll post it to our YouTube channel when the recording is ready. Throughout today's agenda, we'll have a few short presentations from our partner agencies about the programs they administer to help set the stage for our discussions. And we've also asked our utility partners to make a short presentation during part of our agenda. Then we'll work through the topics on our agenda. And finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of what we heard throughout the morning and identify any next steps that we heard. Today's topic is electricity and the grid. We want to cover topics such as grid resiliency and reliability, grid capacity and planning for load growth, interconnection timing, and rate structures. If we have time, we'll have an open topic session towards the end of the work group meeting. And finally, I'll wrap things up at the end with a summary of major themes we've heard and a recap of any action items identified. We'd like to stay focused on the themes we set out for today, being careful that we don't stray into topics that we've covered in prior meetings or that are better covered in our last work group meeting, costs and funding. It may be hard to stay out of those areas, but please understand if I interrupt and redirect to keep us on topic. We're here to listen, to facilitate conversation, and to work through issues. I hope we can avoid prepared remarks, presentations, and non-constructive dialogue. We'll have a more productive meeting if we can keep our remarks concise, allowing for more voices to be heard and more back and forth conversation. As part of facilitating dialogue, please don't be surprised if we have follow-up questions. And so before we start, I want to extend my thanks to our partner agencies for joining us today, presenting and being part of the conversation. I want to thank our work group members for offering to be a part of this dialogue, and thank you to all of our participants for contributing to this conversation. And as we get started, if I could ask those who are on the panel to rename if they haven't yet, if you can make sure that your name is listed as first and last and affiliation. I'm going to quickly go through how to accomplish that. If you hover over your participation box, your video box, you'll see 3 dots. And if you click on the 3 dots, you should be able to roll your mouse down to rename. And that should bring up the rename box, and you can add your first, last, and affiliation. Thank you for that. Rather than taking time from our agenda to have everybody introduce themselves, I'm going to ask that the first time that you're called on to speak, that you introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation. And with that, I will, let's see if I can do this on the fly, introduce the CARB staff that we have. Leslie Goodbody has been organizing these meetings. Thank you very much, Leslie. Catherine Garrison has been also supporting that effort and organizing some of our panelists. Wente Yin and Aria Berliner and Brandon Rose are helping behind the scenes with the technical and the logistical on the day activities. And I believe we have Craig During, who is manager of the section which is producing the advanced clean advanced clean fleets regulation on the line. And Craig, do you have other staff on the line today?
I'm checking, Annalisa. I think it's just me today.
Okay, great. And from our partner agencies, I have Michael Truax from CPUC, and we have other staff from CPUC as well. As we get to parts on the agenda, we'll come back to them. Michael, did you want to give a brief introduction to CEC's work in this area?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Truax, a senior analyst here at the CPUC's Transportation Electrification section and Energy Division, which is a mouthful. Here at the CPUC, we oversee and regulate the investor-owned utilities across the state of California, and I believe it's 2/3 of the state is customers located in these investor-owned utilities that we regulate. Part of the CPUC's effort to further the state's transportation electrification goals is to ensure that the utilities are proposing or overviewing what the utilities' proposals are for transportation electrification charging infrastructure, and overseeing the rate design process that they will be charging customers to actually utilize the infrastructure. In addition to employment and rate design aspect of this, we are also ensuring that the utilities are safely installing the infrastructure and they are able to be safely utilized. So now, we have, as I mentioned, we have about $2 billion of investor ratepayer funding that's going towards transportation electrification infrastructure, and I believe 40,000 charge ports out of that investment. With me today, I know it was already mentioned, but I have Masood Fuday, who can speak to the rates portion of the CPUs, and Danny Tutt, who will be able to discuss the PSPS component of the utilities safety component. So that's all I have.
Thank you. And we have California Energy Commission representatives and Elizabeth John, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your programs.
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth John, and I'm manager of the Medium and Heavy Duty Zero Emission Technologies Office with the CEC. I'll keep my comments fairly brief this morning since we have 2 of our resident experts giving presentations later in the work group. We have Micah Wolford, who is staff in our Fuels and Transportation Division, who will be speaking about the heavy load model, which analyzes, among other parameters, truck travel patterns, load curve scenarios, and charging demand to inform where loads could exist and behave through time. And he'll also be talking about the EVSE deployment and grid evaluation tool, or EDGE, which seeks to integrate those results with utility grid capacity data to inform users about how those loads could impact certain regions. And then we also have Quentin G., who's supervisor in our Energy Assessments Division, who will be speaking about CEC's MDHD vehicle choice model and broad statewide electricity demand from the MDHD sector. I'll just say that the reason we're all here today, California needs a lot of electric vehicle chargers to support its clean transportation goals. And currently we have over 73,000 chargers in public and shared private locations. CEC's analysis indicates that by 2030, we will need over 1 million chargers to support California's most ambitious policies for electrifying transportation. And that'll include about 157,000 high-powered chargers for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. These chargers are going to require a high amount of power ranging from 50 kW all the way up to several megawatts. So the amount of power needed, along with the time it will take to make the necessary upgrades to get power to the sites, could be significant. So it's very important that we talk about charging infrastructure in the context of the energy system. And electric vehicles can be valuable for California's power system. They're often plugged in for longer than the need to charge, which gives an opportunity for smart charging. Vehicle grid integration could really make the grid more economical to operate, cheaper for ratepayers, and more resilient. So I'm excited that our agencies, CEC, CPUC, CARB, we're all working really closely together to address both the barriers and the benefits to transportation electrification. We're examining grid impacts at the local and system level, which may result from clustered MDHD loads, and we're planning early. But this process, I think, is going to be the most important to engage stakeholders early and help us in meeting our zero emission goals. So very excited for today's conversation. I'm here to listen and hear, and thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And we also have Delphine Ho from Cal ISO.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Delphine Ho. I'm Director of California Regulatory Affairs at the California ISO. I'm here really to maybe demystify a little bit of what the Cal ISO does and how we coordinate very closely with both the CPUC and the CEC as we operate the grid and look at potential transmission expansion in order to foster more electric vehicle growth, for especially on the heavy and medium duty side, which we understand from our close relationship with the regulatory agencies, is going to look very different than light duty vehicles. So we're excited to be working with them and being in this forum to kind of understand and hear and learn. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. And we also have Gia Vason from GoBiz.
Hi, good morning. I'm the Assistant Deputy Director for the Zero Emission Vehicle Market Development Unit at GoBiz. And yeah, I'll just make a couple brief remarks too, kind of high level. We really focus on aligning the state's ZEV vision and the implementation efforts, and of course in close collaboration with our sister agencies. And we also work on creating a nexus between government and industry to try to help facilitate more collaborative problem solving. We led the development of, and we continue to lead the updates for the ZEV market development strategy, which came out last year around this time, and its various components. We spend a good deal of our time, our team spends a good deal of time on focusing on permit streamlining as well, and working with the local jurisdictions to make sure that they are aware of and implementing legislation such as AB 1236 and AB 970, both of which aim to, and direct the local jurisdictions to streamline and to reduce timelines for permitting charging infrastructure, both light duty through medium and heavy duty. So it's just kind of a little high level sketch there, but I am really excited to be here today. And I just wanted to add that what I'm hoping to gain through this meeting is a clear understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that we have for ensuring that the policies and the rates are working for business to be able to invest in scaling the market. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gia. Okay, we're going to do a quick exercise. We've done these in the last 2 meetings and found it really helpful for kind of bringing our focus in on what we're going to talk about today. Catherine is going to run us through an exercise, a word cloud exercise. Catherine, would you like to take it away?
Yes, good morning all. And we are going to have you go ahead and activate this. Just a moment while I share my screen. So we're going to take a pulse of, we want to hear from our fleets and our panelists, what keeps you up at night regarding electricity in the grid. We know that electrifying, can you see my screen, folks? Okay, great. So if you could respond by going to pollev.com, no need to set up an account. This is free. And so you go to that pollev.com. I believe someone's going to put that into the chat, the hyperlink, so you can click on that. And then once you get there, you enter Crystal Laza at 824. You can also join via text messages, and here we go. We see that people are putting in some results here. People are talking about power, timeline, availability. We see cost is getting larger. Reliability is getting quite some say on here. Timeline is also getting larger here. More responses create a larger font for that item. Wow, we're seeing quite a bit of this: land use, regulations, resiliency, emergency, off-road, charging time. Are there some other themes that's come to mind for you, Annalisa, that you're seeing? Wow, there's a lot of different themes in here. Interconnection is another one. Yeah, Annalisa, you're on mute. So if you wanted to talk about the themes you're sharing, please unmute.
Yeah, I thought you could hear me because your response was right. It was exactly what I was saying, is the variety of topics that have come up. I'm not sure we've had this much variability in the issues from our past two work group meetings. This is really interesting. So yeah, demand, timeline, cost, capacity, infrastructure, availability. This is great. But it does feel like cost, reliability, and timeline, with capacity and demand as close seconds, maybe infrastructure as well. Should we give this another 10 seconds or so?
Yes, that sounds wonderful. So with that, we'll go ahead and take a screenshot of this. So we'll be able to use this and noodle on it. And I'm really glad to know that some of these topics are on our agenda. And I'm really hoping we'll have that meaningful discussion. We've been talking about that. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, cost, timeline, reliability, availability. I think those are all topics we'll be covering today. We're going to start with, and we had some time. Actually, Kathy, can you bring up the agenda?
Hey, Annalisa, and before we jump right into that, I wanted to just say a couple of words. Do you think now is a good time to maybe talk about, well, first of all, I've noticed some folks have been raising their hands from the audience, and we want to encourage you to use the Q&A box to type in your questions. So we're going to be monitoring that box, and as questions come up that we feel, that are falling into, that are relevant to the discussion, we will pose those questions to our panelists during the work group. Of course, other questions might be coming up that are just sort of logistics sort of questions that we're responding to in the Q&A box as well. So please, all of attendees and participants, use the Q&A box as much as you can. Near the end of some of our panelist discussions, we will be calling on members from the audience to pose their questions, but time permitted. So we feel that perhaps you might be a little bit better off of getting your thoughts out as if you use the Q&A box. And then do you think now's a good time to talk about the follow-up meeting, or shall we talk about it at the end?
We can, so we're realizing that we've scheduled the next meeting, which is costs and funding, for next week, and preparation for this meeting kind of clouded our ability to do the logistical work and prep for the 19th. So we're looking at postponing that meeting to the 27th, just to put that out there. We'll talk about that again at the end of the meeting. But if you want to mark your calendars, if that was one of the work group meetings that you plan to attend, know that we're strongly considering moving that to the 27th.
And that we will be sending out a notice to that effect once we've settled on that.
Right.
So look for that. It will be going out through the same channels that we send all of our public notices out through ACF, ACT, and the other notices. So anyway, stay tuned.
So the first topic that we were going to tackle today, I see brief panelist introductions on our agenda. We're going to skip that in favor of asking you to introduce yourself when you take the mic with a question or a comment. So we're going to start off with electric grid demand, capacity, and planning for the future. And we'll start with the issues around grid resiliency and reliability. We heard a lot during our workshops for ACF and other venues that stakeholders are concerned about power not being available when needed, concerned about days-long power outages, and concern about the increased electricity load causing the state to either have capacity issues or increased rates or other challenges. And concerns about the cost of upgrading the grid. We have a few folks that we'd like to tap on to start this conversation off. We'll start with CPUC and Danny Tutt and Tony Knoll, if you'd like to chime in. Do we have our partners from CPUC and, sorry, CPU, yeah.
Hi, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Hi, Daniel Tutt for the CPUC. I work on the Resiliency and Microgrids team as a utilities engineer. And so I was going to just talk really briefly about PSPS and some of what I've been doing on it, and then a little bit about what's happening in another proceeding that Tony Knoll's actually the lead on. He couldn't make it today, but just to give a brief sense, PSPS, or public safety power shutoffs, are considered a measure of last resort to respond to wildfire risk. So it's not, it's not that the infrastructure itself is falling or failing. It's that there's a risk from wildfire, and so it's considered a last resort because of the extremity of that risk to sort of de-energize parts of the system. And it's not something we order the IOUs to do or necessarily are sort of leading. It's something that there's already authority for from the Public Utilities Code in section sort of 451 and 399.2a, but basically there's already authority to sort of run the system in a safe manner. So if there's extreme risk from something, there's already the authority on the utility side to potentially de-energize a line in order to mitigate that risk. And so the IOU is responsible for determining the need for and executing those events. But we have broad authority to sort of implement safety requirements and do some oversight over how they use that. And so I think, you know, PSPS events, at least for most of the state, are a relatively new phenomenon. And it wasn't until July of 2018 that the commission sort of officially authorized or expanded authority to de-energize to all the different utilities, and had a set of requirements that went along with that, including reporting, public outreach, customer notification, and different sorts of mitigation requirements. And then we opened a rulemaking. So I don't know if anyone's following along, but rulemaking 18-12-005 that's dealt with PSPS and has released 3 decisions about, you know, how PSPS is run, different types of sort of mitigations, operational controls, models that are used. And so that's an ongoing rulemaking at the commission. And, you know, we'd appreciate any additional sort of input from stakeholders there. To jump from that a little bit into, you know, how PSPS is changing and mitigations, with, you know, the grain of salt that a lot of these are new things. And a lot of this is sort of, you know, it's not directly under our authority, it's just things we're watching. But, you know, PSPS is a planned outage. So it's different than other types of outages in that sense. It's not, you know, an emergency. You do have notifications weeks in advance. You can prepare in a certain way for them. You can sort of estimate when and where they're going to happen in a sort of more reliable way than you can with certain other outages. And that does make certain mitigations easier. But there's also been a number of, I guess, just to divide the changes that have been happening. There's been a number of changes in PSPS just that we've seen since sort of 2018, 2019, 2020. And those changes, I could say, broadly fit into 2 sort of categories. So you think of changes in the actual scope and the models that guide a PSPS event. And those have become significantly more sophisticated. And so the scope, the timing, where they're going to happen is really decreased from the modeling side, from trying to understand where actually there is the high risk. And so there is a reason to de-energize. That's become a lot more sophisticated, even in the last sort of couple of years of working. And so I think there's I would say a pretty strong evidence that that's a pretty significant reduction just on that side. Then on the other side, there's actual mitigation. So that includes, you know, infrastructure hardening, things like undergrounding, covered conductor, but also potentially things like microgrids and other resiliency measures that allow there to be energy, even if there's some other de-energizations. Those are moving forward also. I think hardening already is occurring and will continue to occur. Some of the other resiliency measures are just starting to occur. And that's some of what I work on, including, you know, microgrids at the substation level, if there's a worry that the substation will lose power during a PSPS event. And so overall, I was just going to say there's sort of a suite of both operational, you know, sort of modeling and scope changes, mitigations, and then also operational improvements, just as experience is gained, that have, I think, effectively reduced the scope and scale of PSPS over the last couple of years, and are expected to continue to do that. And with that, I'll pass it off to the next panelist.
Well, before you pass the mic, I'd like to just remind everyone, our speakers especially, to please maybe spell out some of your acronyms before you say them. I know we're in this world of jargon and everybody in the utility industry really gets it, but we want to make sure that our panelists and other folks in the audience are, you know, have a real comprehensive understanding of what we're talking about. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Was Tony also going to speak on this, or am I passing it on to CEC?
You can pass it on. I covered Tony's portion at the beginning.
Okay, great. Micah, would you like to take the mic?
Yeah, sure. I have a couple of slides that I'd like to share. Is that possible from your end, or should I share them on mine?
Catherine, are you on for that?
Yes. Can you see them now, Micah?
We can see them.
Wonderful.
Let me see here. Sorry, my windows kind of moved around a little bit when that happened. Okay, perfect. Can you hear me right now? Okay, awesome. So yeah, my name is Micah Wofford, and I work in the Fuels and Transportation Division within the California Energy Commission. I'm the staff lead for a medium and heavy duty vehicle infrastructure projection model, as well as an analytical tool involving grid integration capacity. So the medium and heavy duty load operations and deployment model, which is known as heavy load, is a part of a vast network of analytical efforts that take place throughout California state agencies. So this graphic here that you can see shows just relationships between those efforts and how they ultimately plan to affect infrastructure deployment. So each of the items shown here fill an important role in determining things such as vehicle population forecasts, transportation energy demand, infrastructure quantification, charging load profiles, grid needs and capacity constraints, and other associated programs in order to create a complex network of analyses which are necessary to support the state's ZEV adoption targets, including medium and heavy duty. So the heavy load model, which I mentioned earlier, utilizes medium and heavy duty vehicle population data, as well as assumptions about vehicle characteristics and charging behavior, also forecasted statewide energy demand, and other sources of data to sort of generate a collection of charging profiles, which are broken down by vehicle application type and county. So also the modeling team working on heavy load is developing a module to simulate daily truck and fleet trips to determine sort of a more granular energy demand and consumption rates, and also parking behaviors for different types of vehicles and several different types of applications in order to pinpoint where the medium and heavy duty load will proliferate and be most prominent in the near future and also the far future. So outcomes from heavy load and other efforts that are shown on the screen here will eventually be filtered through the Energy Commission's EVSE, so electric vehicle supply equipment, EVSE deployment and grid evaluation tool, which is known as EDGE, shown in the green box here. So all of those things will be combined and layered with utility grid capacity data to improve the geospatial resolution of the solutions and inform where infrastructure will be the best suited for deployment by basically helping project designers and construction teams identify ideal locations to install those chargers. So just go on to the next slide, please. So this, I'm going to speak a little bit more about the EDGE tool now. So the overarching goal of the analysis through that tool is to basically close the gap in terms of grid capacity planning, and also to understand the technical details of the load profiles that come out of our projection models. So the CEC is performing this analysis for light duty vehicles, but we're also evaluating grid impacts and flagging potential upgrades, which are especially important for within the context of medium and heavy duty vehicles, since they're the load is imminent and it's going to be extremely impactful on the grid. And so we need to be proactive and ready for it. So using public grid data, the EDGE tool will also help to create a basis to democratize make-ready analysis. So it'll give users the opportunity to choose their own ideal locations and to install these chargers based on what available grid capacity data there is. So we can use the analysis results from this to go from the circuit connection and that's shown on the in the grid capacity data and evaluate any endpoints where the chargers could be connected, such as parking lots or depots or even building panels, depending on your desired application type. So finally, users also have been asking for a better way to interface with this type of information. So that shows the state of the grid. So EDGE is also hoping to achieve that goal as a public-facing tool. So the images shown here are the result of analysis of utility data specifically from the integration capacity analysis maps that show available capacity to integrate additional load. The Energy Commission is working closely with the Public Utilities Commission and also the utilities in California to address any concerns and improve the processes that to identify opportunities to upgrade grid infrastructure and streamline the deployment of the infrastructure overall. So the grid data here may not necessarily show the realistic picture of what's actually going on with the grid, but it's the best available data that we have to work with, and so it's given by the utilities. So that's why we're working with the utilities on this. So I'm hoping that the planning timelines for certain processes to get interconnected and get the projects energized can be streamlined and improved through these two analytical efforts that are coming together to work together. So that's all I have to say about the heavy load model and the edge tool at this time. Happy to take questions later if they come up, but at this time I'll pass it to the next presenter.
Thank you, Micah.
Sure.
Now I'm going to turn over to Delphine from California ISO.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Delphine, and the California Independent System Operator, and I'm going to use that one acronym, CAISO, is probably not a well-known entity for a lot of folks, even in the electricity industry. So I'm going to give you a very, very short overview. But more importantly, I think between Daniel and Micah's presentation, I want to kind of bring together how we fit into that landscape and also how this all fits into the discussion we're having today. So just to backtrack a little bit about the CAISO, we are what is called an independent system operator. So we operate the actual high voltage electric grid, the generators on the grid, we run a market. And another thing that we do that's also very important, probably relevant to this conversation, is that we plan for upgrades, what we call expansion, to the high voltage electric system. So why does that matter? Our footprint currently covers, on a reliability basis, about 80% of the state of California, though our market footprint is a little bit larger than that. But the most important thing to remember in our name is really the I, it's the independent, and I'll explain why that is. We are independent because we do not own any of the things that we operate. So we do not own any of the generation, we do not own any of the transmission. That is what keeps us independent and neutral and allows us to run a market in a way that doesn't defer to any single entity or the incumbent, and we're trying to have a competitive, neutral platform. But the implications of that are, for example, we don't own any of the generation. So in fact, we are dependent on entities like the California Public Utilities Commission to authorize procurement for their load serving entities to actually get resources. We also have other regulatory authorities in our footprint. So that's largely the municipal utilities in our footprint. And they, under their own jurisdiction, will authorize, procurement of new resources that will get placed onto the wholesale grid. And then we end up, if they are placed into the market, we end up operating those resources. So that's very important to remember, because even though we operate, we don't own. So there's only so much that the CAISO can do. So, one of the concerns that I saw, in the words that came up is, resilience and reliability. Do we have enough generation? Because we are electrifying not only in the transportation sector, but across other sectors like buildings, for example. Collectively, we are all using more electricity in different ways. And how do we keep with state goals to keep that electricity clean or renewable? So again, even though the CAISO operates that, we track a lot of that. We eventually will rely on other entities to actually provide the physical resources onto the system. The other thing we don't own is the actual transmission line. So again, the high voltage transmission lines, not the ones that you might see connecting to homes and businesses, but really the large high voltage ones you see kind of driving down the highway. Again, we don't own any of those. We in fact have a close relationship working with entities that do own it. For the most part in the state of California, it's largely the investor-owned utilities, but there are also municipals that own their own transmission lines or have partial ownership of different transmission lines. And so we work closely with them to operate it. But, going back to where Daniel had presented from the CPUC, when you're talking about a public safety power shutdown, that's not an operational issue, really, in our minds. That's a safety issue. So for the CAISO, we defer to the actual equipment owner to call those. So for example, if an IOU said, hey, the wind conditions are really bad tomorrow, it's very dry, this has a large potential to spark a potential fire, we need to de-energize, the CAISO does not question that. We take that as given, and we talk with the actual asset owner, and we say, yep, that's your safety issue. And the most that the CAISO will do is provide an impact study of what could happen if certain lines are de-energized. For the most part, we have been able to reroute the energy through other means. There is some redundancy in or networked ability in the high voltage system so that if one line is de-energized, we can get the power to residents or commercial entities in a different way. However, where it is much more limited is when the utilities are talking about de-energizing slightly lower voltage lines, because there's less of a network. They tend to be a lot more radial lines. So there's sort of less ability for the energy to flow through a different pathway to get to the end user. So I do want to make that differentiation, but at the end of the day, we do work closely with both the generation owners as well as the transmission owners, but very importantly with the Public Utilities Commission and the California Energy Commission. Another thing I want to introduce here is that we typically use a very generic term, the grid. From the CAISO perspective, when we say the grid, we mean the high voltage grid. But that's an important differentiation because, you know, all of the great work that the CEC does, for example, the really detailed, excellent work that Micah presented, that is in close collaboration with the PUC on the lower voltage, oftentimes distribution grid. So looking at integration capacity, et cetera, that in itself has not yet reached the level of the CAISO. What the CAISO does is that we work closely with the CEC to understand the overall impact of a lot of different kinds of electrification, not only transportation, but you know, as I mentioned, there's a lot of fuel switching going on. There's a lot of looking at replacing, you know, gas-fired heating with electric heating, for example. So that's going to have a large impact on the state and the grid overall. And once it kind of reaches a point where it's bubbling up from the distribution side, it will start showing up on the high voltage side, and that's when CAISO's transmission planning teams will get involved to look at where there might be high voltage transmission upgrades that are needed in order to accommodate all of the electrification. One thing that we found very interesting, especially when we're talking about the medium and heavy duty side, is because the usage of electricity is so intense, because the usage patterns are very, very different than the passenger side, there could be, you know, a greater emphasis on a need for upgrade sooner rather than later. So there's all different kinds of different conversations and strategies when we're looking at different kinds of electrification. And that's where we really want to work very closely with the Public Utilities Commission, who in turn is working very closely with all of the load serving entities under its jurisdiction. We also want to include in that conversation the community choice aggregators that are kind of, you know, up and coming and looking at electrifying a lot of their consumers, as well as all the good work that the CEC does in forecasting and all the detailed work that looks at the geographic diversity and or the dispersion of that forecast. So you can say, you know, kind of off the bat that some of the large energy users, maybe the medium heavy duty side, maybe that will cluster itself into port areas, into more industrialized or, you know, urban areas. But there also could be other areas that are developing those sectors, you know, purposefully, that could also see a big boom in electricity usage. So all of that kind of flows together on our planning side, but we do see a lot of the other half of it, which is that's the electricity usage, but we're also coordinating closely with the regulatory entities on where does the supply come from? You know, what are the new resources that are supplying the electricity for the various end uses? And that's, you know, a big discussion on battery storage as a cleaner resource that could either work in conjunction with or potentially in future replace a lot of the gas-fired resources that we have on our system, but also integrating our renewables, integrating solar and wind, distributed energy resources, even demand response, and also looking at even broader outside of the CAISO or the California footprint, what does that look like in working with our neighbors, either out of state or even in a very new way, offshore wind? So all of that is just a very quick and dirty overview of what the CAISO is and how we work closely with the regulatory agencies. And hopefully that's a high level overview, but that puts us in context for this discussion and how that could be useful for the folks attending this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So let's open it up for conversation here. Questions for our panelists that have just spoken, or comments that folks would like to make around this topic of resiliency and reliability.
And also, I'd like to save some time with this to make sure we grab some questions that have been coming in from the chat, because a lot of really good questions are coming in. So we'll be getting questions from our panelists as well as folks from our audience who entered questions in the chat.
Great, thank you. Let's start with Mcdougall.
Great, thank you. Just a quick question for the panelists. So, I think anybody who lives in California has experienced power outages, and I think you did a nice job stating how they occur and the reasons. So kind of down to the user level, facility level, typically we see backup power used today at the facility level, and going forward, this will have to grow exponentially, I would think, as you add heavy duty vehicles to the fleet and to ensure their ability to perform their function on a daily basis. How is the state looking at the backup power at the facility level? What's the vision? More generators, battery, and how is that being incorporated into the proposals going forward?
Do we have anybody who wants to tackle this?
Hi, this is Kyle Pratt from CEC. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Kyle.
Great. So I know of some activities coming up. It's not centered at CEC, but I know that this is in the activity stream, and that is analysis under Senate Bill 671. So some of the 671 analysis for the freight corridors involves other considerations such as battery backup power and microgrids at the facility level. I don't think those recommendations are put together yet, but there is active collaboration and taking an inventory of activities that would be relevant to it. For example, the CEC's research division has piloted microgrid and various stationary battery storage applications, which certainly could be applicable to fleet facilities. But the recommendations are forthcoming, but there's a lot of there's real world data to draw from for these limited demonstrations that have occurred so far, but that look promising for these applications.
Thanks.
Is there timing of that, and are those costs going to be incorporated into any proposal that's being put forward as a regulation? And this is, I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself, Mcdougall, American Trucking Associations.
Thank you. I will look. I don't want to. I don't have the time frame all in my head. And again, CEC is not the lead for this effort, but we're assisting sister agencies with this. But I'll look up some info, and it may be in the legislation itself. I'll drop that into the chat when I find it. Thank you for the question.
And I think you might be asking too if we're incorporating the inclusion of backup power microgrids into our cost analysis for ACF.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can address that at our next meeting, but I don't know if we have folks on the line who are familiar with the cost analysis.
Yeah, Annalisa, this is Craig. Thanks, Mike. Right now, the cost analysis for the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation does look at infrastructure cost, but we are not looking at backup generation. It's the infrastructure deployment, it's the use of the electricity and those types of costs. So, the backup generation was not considered at this point.
Yeah, I would just suggest, I mean, you think of a cold storage facility today, any business, hospital, whatever you want that needs to function has backup capabilities. And I think those same functionality applies to a fleet that's electrified as we go forward.
Kyle Pinn with Burns & McDonnell. Am I okay to interject here from a practical standpoint? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Burns & McDonnell does a lot of upfront study work as well as implementation, installation. So we're dealing with a number of different customers, and this is something that we get faced with a lot, which is the question of what happens when the grid goes down and they've fully electrified. So it's easy to conceive of this when you're, 10, 25, 30% of your fleet converted, but when you start getting a half or more, then you're starting to jeopardize your mission when the grid is down, for any length of time. You're going to, not have the charging during your window. We've looked at a number of backup power scenarios, and the cost always works out to be much, much more than what the project is willing to spend. So we usually pull short of installing the backup power. Most of the time we're putting switchgear in place that has, capability for backup power, even going so far as to put in hard stands and quick connects for backup generation. But we're looking more at multiple circuits coming into sites. We've also had a number of conversations, one very active conversation, not in California, but it's actually in Texas, about resilient industrial parks, where a number of different entities come together and invest in a small microgrid that serves all of those businesses, so you can split the cost amongst a number of different businesses. And so those are all very legitimate concerns, and most of it comes down to the cost of the power and the relative value of it. And most of the time it's difficult to put a dollar figure on what the value of that infrastructure is, because you don't need it until you need it. And when you do, you need it badly. So the cost analysis of that for the individual business is very difficult to justify. So.
Okay, thanks. I can tell this is going to be a topic for our next work group meeting for sure. But appreciate the input today. Jason.
Yeah, this is Jason Dake from Orange EV. We manufacture an all-electric terminal tractor. One of the questions I had about the grid and actually kind of the stress on the grid, but also the interplay between some other regulations that are coming out there. For instance, you've got these indirect source rules requirements that are coming in various air quality districts. Terminal tractors are commonly used in the distribution centers. You've got them in warehousing, all those spaces, and they're usually very much kind of geographically clumped together. You have the Inland Empire, you have a few other areas where they're very common. In our experience, we worked with PGE a couple of years ago, and there was a lot of work to upgrade the grid just from the site itself to the transfers, basically wherever that point was in the grid that was the closest to it, and had to upgrade a lot of transformers and things of that nature. In a lot of these plans, it seems like it's focusing on freight corridors and maybe I'm just misreading that statement, but it seems like it's talking about the actual highways and things like that. But it seems like with this indirect source rule now in effect, that there needs to be a focus on those geographic areas that contain a lot of those distribution and warehousing centers. Has there been any analysis on the effect of those type of rules on the grid? And I know you were just talking about having microgrids and backup power, but that seems like it's incumbent upon the site owner as opposed to the utility company. So has there been an analysis of how that is going to affect in a very localized manner when you've got these requirements to have zero emission vehicles at a site that are actually going to be drawing off the grid during peak hours, during working hours, and things like that? Has that gone into any of this planning, or is this just focused on kind of a broader, when we get heavy duty freight over the road, that where we're actually running that on the highways and have that infrastructure in place and focused on the grid in that respect, or not?
So I can take that question if that's okay. This is Micah Wofford from the CEC. So yeah, earlier I spoke about the heavy load model, medium and heavy duty electric vehicle infrastructure, load operations and deployment model. So that's basically doing exactly what you're describing. It uses sort of all of these different types of programs from different state agencies and data sources, such as like, CARBs regulations. We have information from the CEC's sort of transportation energy demand forecast. We work with fleet data in terms of vehicle population, vehicle characteristics, things like that, to basically simulate where we think that these types of loads are going to, like you say, cluster together, basically where they're going to exist and how they're going to grow based on charging behavior, based on travel demand, where these vehicles live, how they move, where they end up at night or whenever their duty cycles allow for that. So we have certain vehicle types that we look at in this model, such as, I'll just list them all here. There's not very many. We have buses, we have refuse trucks, drayage trucks, your typical tractor trailer, utility trucks, construction, agriculture. We have medium duty that we simulate, as well as just other types of freight trucks as well. So all of these things are being looked at as granular as possible. But having said that, you have to remember the caveat that the model is only as good as the data that goes into it. And in terms of medium and heavy duty vehicle data in general, it's just very scarce and it's hard to obtain because it's definitely not as evolved as the, say, light duty sector when it comes to electric vehicles. And so, the technology is still evolving and there hasn't been much use data out of it that we can gather. But on the flip side of that, we've been making very good progress in simulating these types of, trips based on, data that we've gathered from universities, from other state agencies. And we do have some fleet partners that we're working with that give us their sort of individual data that we can maybe use that to fill the gaps in places that we don't have data in the state. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do with the heavy load model, and then using that information in tandem with what I showed with the Edge tool, which uses the utility grid capacity data to kind of further filter that information. We are really trying to get as granular as possible, where these types of infrastructure projects can be installed, because we want to be as proactive as possible, because we know it takes forever to get these types of grid upgrades built out and planned for. Some people are telling us that in order to go from planning a huge like charger installation to actually getting it operational and energized and people able to use it and plug in can take anywhere from 8 to 10 years, depending on the different types of upgrades that are necessary, if it involves like a substation upgrade. So that's why these models exist, in order to be as proactive as possible, to work with the Public Utilities Commission and also the utilities themselves to just get the plan streamlined and faster, though, so that way these people can charge and the duty cycles aren't interrupted, but at the same time we can mitigate or alleviate any impact that the grid may have.
I have one quick follow-up question on what you just said. You mentioned the equipment, and that this is kind of what I was pointing out is you didn't actually mention terminal tractors. And just FYI, Orange EV was the first commercially deployed Class 8 all-electric vehicle in the United States. It was first deployed in California. We've got hundreds of those deployed in California now with various customers. The interesting fact about those terminal tractors is you talk about their routes and things like that, and what you were just saying. Terminal tractors don't have routes. They are located on that site. They charge continually throughout the day, and it seems like that presents a very localized stress on the grid for those sites, as opposed to looking at it as we have to worry about this route and have a more expansive geographic area. if you're modeling like that, you may want to actually find those fleets that have the terminal tractors and have those, because they are large drains on the grid. I will say that, because they're continually opportunity charging throughout the day. We have companies that own our trucks that run them 24/7 a day or throughout the year. And they're running them every day of the week, 24 hours a day. And they are still charging during that time. And so those type of activities, I think, present a very localized stress on the grid that probably needs to be taken into account in your analysis. And when you're upgrading, that needs to be something that's part of that thought process.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, to be as granular as possible will help us develop the best solution possible for the entire state. So things like that, the terminal trucks aren't necessarily included in the heavy load model, but the CEC is also working on future analysis on things like off-road charging and things like that aren't necessarily captured within the heavy load model. So I can't say much about it right now, but just keep an eye out for anything from the CEC on any of those types of efforts coming soon in the future. So
I have two requests for Micah.
Sure.
First, let folks know how they can share all of this valuable information with you to make the edge model more robust and accurate. I think that's going to be really important, because the audience here is really going to be an excellent source for you to really work on all of your models. And the second thing, could you please let people know when it's going to be public, the edge model?
Yeah, so I guess for the time being, if you have any comments or questions about any of these things, please, I included my email address on one of the slides, but it's like on the bottom left of the first slide, I think, but I can chat my email address as well.
Please do.
Yeah, that way folks, if they have questions, and they want further discussion, you can just let me know. I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. Secondly, the Edge tool doesn't really have a definite time for publication yet, but it is definitely planned. We're working internally right now on developing a formal sort of project plan for Edge, so that way we can have a robust and solidified timeline for that. So as soon as that becomes available, it will be shared publicly.
Is there a schedule for the next 21-27 report release?
That one is being it's being scoped out right now. Okay. And so the analysis is supposed to happen every couple of years. It's like every other year type of thing. So we released our first report last summer. And so Kyle, if you're on the line, would you be able to speak more specifically about this?
Sure. If folks can hear me, the final version of the first biennial report came out in summer of last year. So we would expect, 2 years after then, by summer of 2023. But same as last time, we expect to have drafts available before then. But we're still fine-tuning the schedule and, to some extent, the scope. There could be new portions to include. So we don't have a firm estimate on the month for when the initial staff draft will be available for comment. We may offer it up for comment and then have a workshop to discuss stakeholder comments before we fold in the recommendations and publish the final version of the report. But yes, the timeframe for the final report should be at or before summer of 2023.
Okay, thanks. This has been a rich conversation. I'm going to move to the next person with their hand up, which I believe is Urvi Negrini.
All right. This is Urvi Negrini from PowerFlex. I'm working on the fleet development side of things. So the product side, as opposed to the actual project sites, for those of you who are in product versus project companies. The key thing that I think is really important is when you talk about utilities having those sorts of 8 to 10 year timelines, when you talk about models taking 2 to 3 years to develop, what fundamentally ends up happening for a lot of fleets is you end up in a scenario where you need to bring your own power. You're going to add either some solar on site, you're going to add generators on site, you're going to do your own switchgear updates, you're going to do everything you can to avoid an interconnection specifically for your fleet if you know it's going to take that long. So a solar interconnection tends to take less time than a vehicle interconnection because those programs are better run because they're just older, there's more historical data, they're more streamlined. And I think one of the things we need to realize is that the bring your own power is going to be good for sites, but it's going to leave a knowledge blind spot at the macro level. And so the pain point is now going to go from perhaps the transmission upgrades or substations to what is the interconnection limitation of a neighborhood. And so it's more important that the utilities and the state are planning for, is this a warehouse district or is this an area that has a lot of parking? If it has a lot of parking, at some point it's going to need more power. So just start preparing for that without necessarily knowing, will it get used all the time? Because if we're using things like load management, we can optimize and lower the power profile, but we're going to have to be operating within a constraint. So you've got your cap on how much power you can actually pull. And if you've got a battery, then you could kind of decouple energy from power a little bit. But I think the capacity constraints of every wire and every panel is going to be what limits the facility, as opposed to just the grid side. Because the grid side, if you know it's going to be 8 to 10 years and you're legally required to move faster than that, the bring your own power approach will get used. So I think the kind of thing that I would have as an ask for the state is knowing that those constraints are going to happen, and the first person to electrify in a warehouse area can use power. The next person won't necessarily have power available because of that first facility. How do you start to think about those land use patterns in parallel with, all right, new apartment building equals more deliveries equals more loading docks equal just give them a little extra power now. You know, if you've got 30 parking spots, plan that in the future, 100% ZEV sales means everybody's going to need charging. Put load management on the site to reduce the amount of power. You don't need to have 125% power capacity for every EV. That's a complete waste of power. But I think that there are areas where you don't need to get that level of granular detail to know that they're going to need a charger.
Thanks. Are there any agencies that want to jump in on this follow-up? Appreciate that that insight. Thanks. Kevin Hamilton.
Hi, good morning. Kevin Hamilton, Central California Asthma Collaborative. Thank you for this most interesting first phase of this presentation. Mike, naturally Micah, gonna pick on you again, since you do great stuff. So in your summer report, where it seemed we were looking more at LDV rather than MHD, HD, but still, you really demonstrated well the data gaps. And I wondered, number one, what are your plans and timeline for filling those gaps, since a significant amount of the, not just the gaps, but the illustration of inadequate infrastructure is in the San Joaquin Valley, which is the major freight corridor for the whole West Coast. So obviously needs a lot of work and a lot of attention. And secondly, how does this take into account, and I think it's been talked around a bit here, but maybe not directly at, and communicate with the local government agencies there, who are always the wild cards in these situations, where you've got planning going on to build new industrial parks and other planning going on to build big new housing tracts, often sort of outside of what their original general plans were. So that, and then adding in retrofitting in existing, especially stationary uses, as somebody mentioned before, with indirect source rules being updated. I think the Valley has a pretty strong one in already, but South Coast, of course, is working their way through this. How do you account for all these in this model? I mean, it just seems like, how reflexive is the model at that point? And again, I come back to timeline. When do you think you'll be able to fill in at least those data gaps so we can tell folks that they can move forward with surety as far as making this transformation?
Yeah, that's actually a really difficult question.
All the good ones are, right?
Yeah, exactly. The gaps that are shown there kind of correspond to areas that we just don't have data for at all. That includes, publicly owned utilities. You have the CCAs that aren't necessarily tied to any regulatory body, And so and the POUs also are not tied to a regulatory body. And so it's hard to get that data from those entities, because either they just don't have, these small communities with these really small utility companies just, sometimes don't have the staffing power in order to maintain such a database or modeling effort on their own, time, or it's, they don't have a mandate to do so. And so it's not necessarily a priority. So that's kind of one of our really big challenges when it comes to improving the EDGE tool in terms of data granularity and just to paint the overall picture from the state in a better manner. We really want to start working with utility companies like you can see a gap in the map that's shaped exactly like the Sacramento County. So we need information from like SMUD. We need other companies like LEDWP up in the north, perhaps like Reading or even further north. Information from those types of entities will help us fill this gap, but it's going to take some time and some effort to get down and have conversations with them about how not only it could benefit them, but it could benefit other people in the state as well.
So quick comment there,
sure.
Just on that. It sounds, and for the commission and for ARB and others who hold purse strings on budgets and do planning. So it sounds like capacity for them to do we run into this on the transportation side as well, where small MOUs just don't have the money to do the kind of planning that's being demanded of them on, say, SB 375. So maybe focusing on them, finding out, doing an assessment of their needs and how that capacity could be developed. Would that, and then if necessary, funding that specifically, would that be helpful? Would you think it would be helpful to filling in those gaps?
I think that could be really helpful. Another effort that I'd like to point to that the CEC has been working on for a little while now is we have had some solicitations in the past, funding solicitations that work with these types of communities, local communities, small ones, in order to develop sort of an EV infrastructure, what we call blueprints. And so basically what happens is these communities, it could be cities, it could be smaller communities or even counties sometimes that are underrepresented in this context, can sort of develop their own infrastructure plan based on some guidelines that we have in place, submit that to us, and then that helps us plan for those types of communities and groups in the future as well. So this has been going on for at least a couple of years at the CEC, and then we have some future blueprints, ZEV blueprints planned for the future as well. So that type of effort, I think, can be really critical in helping us get started and filling some of these gaps as well.
This is Kyle. I'll just add to the blueprint piece. It's primarily for their own use as well, for these communities and working with businesses and facilities that are there, as well as having CEC benefit from some of the plans that are in those blueprints.
Thanks, Kyle.
Okay.
I'm gonna enter us into a bit of a lightning round here, so we can move on to our next topic
Thanks.
very soon, because we're starting to get behind schedule. So if we can kind of be concise with remarks and questions, we'll take about 4 more hand raisers, and then I'm going to move into the next topic. These are sort of blending together anyway, but also remember that right now we're talking about grid resiliency and reliability. We'll get into capacity and timing and things like that a little further down the agenda. So with that,
I will say I also dropped my email address into the chat. So if anyone wants to have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me that way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave Rody.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this will be a fairly quick question. This goes back to Elizabeth John's comments earlier about CEC plans for getting 1 million chargers out, available by 2030. And I'm a climate policy advocate with the Climate Reality Project. My particular focus is on public transportation and when they'll be electrified. I monitor the zero emissions bus plans that, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge Transit System and SFMTA put out. And they're putting off electrification of buses because of the charging infrastructure. Can anyone answer, is there a specific plan related to getting the high capacity chargers available as soon as possible to public transit agencies in California? Can anybody answer that?
I can
Or
speak
maybe
to, this is Elizabeth. I can speak to, the recent governor's budget has funding to the CEC for for 1,000 transit buses in the next few years. So we are coordinating very closely with CARB to ensure that we are both able to get zero emission buses to transit agencies, but also the supporting infrastructure. So while that isn't a million, we are actively working on those first 1,000.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll look at the governor's budget. I just saw that come out, and 1,000 is not great. Thank you.
Okay, and next up we have Thomas Delenich. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Hi, Thomas Delenich with PMSA. My question on resiliency basically is, PMSA represents marine terminal operators and ocean carriers in California ports. And the big challenge we have is that the ports represent a node of everything heavy duty that's going to be electrified in the future. And when we talk about resiliency, the amount of power demand, no one seems to have a real sense of how we provide true resiliency to something like a port complex. In the analysis that we did, it looks like California ports will be needing 600 megawatts of power in the future for transportation electrification. And that doesn't seem like a microgrid. So when we have inevitable disruptions to the power grid, whether they're small due to wildfires or major, possibly as a result of earthquakes, how do we make sure that our goods movement system, which often begins in the ports, continue to move? I think over the past year of the pandemic, we've seen how important and how potentially fragile our supply chain is. And if the ports are shut down, those supply chains will often go with them.
Hi, Thomas. I'll take that from PG&E at least, just make some comments, right? So our typical T&D planning process, call it our legacy, process, right? It always considers, especially at the transmission level, at the megawatts you're talking about, redundancy in terms of sources and resiliency, right? To assure that reliability continues at those centers. And there was some other good discussion earlier too about even smaller level operations, maybe that are connected at the distribution. For example, a large transit charging station. And what does that look like? Or do we feed it from the grid today just in a radial configuration that if there's maintenance or there's an emergency that occurs on that line, there's no backup source? So I think those are definitely good questions and kind of a reality check too on what the solutioning is, right? Is there an expectation that we still have N-1 contingency planning for these very critical EV centers? So I guess I'm just echoing some of the concerns, but I'll just add that, from a transmission, from a bulk power standpoint, we still will continue to adhere to our Nerc reliability standards for transmission planning purposes. And that's typically what's fed into those high power density areas that you're speaking to.
Sorry, what's a Nerc reliability standard? That's not something I'm familiar with.
Sorry, that's what our transmission planning standards are, to adhere to certain basic reliability principles that is coordinated across the entire United States.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in on this one? Okay.
I can just add something to that real quick. One of the things that's concerning about that is, I appreciate that there are reliability standards nationwide, but we obviously have power delivery problems today in California. And as we intensify electrification, we become more vulnerable. So what we have been doing in the past is not sufficient. I think we really need to look as part of the transportation electrification. Reliability and resiliency are baked into the delivery of this transformation. Otherwise, as a state, we are going to be particularly vulnerable. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Pamela Mcdougall.
Hi, thank you. I'm Pamela Mcdougall with the Environmental Defense Fund. I recognize the concern, in particular when it comes to grid resiliency and reliability. I work primarily on medium and heavy duty fleet electrification. And so public safety power shutoffs is a concern for fleets. And I agree with a lot of the panelists that have spoken that looking at targeted programs for on-site solar and storage and microgrids is a solution. And it should be something that the state agencies should be looking towards. However, I wanted to flip it a little bit because we're talking about grid resiliency and reliability. And I want to recognize that we're also transitioning our power sector to a lot of intermittent resources. And with that, you're going to need a lot more load flexibility on your grid to be able to balance that out and ensure grid resiliency and reliability. So I guess my question to state staff and for any of the planners on this panel is, how are you looking at leveraging these new fleet electrification, which is essentially a battery on wheel, and their affiliate charging infrastructure, which is often for fleets coupled with on-site solar and storage, to be able to ensure more reliability and resiliency at a lower cost, as well as to avoid expensive overbuild of the grid?
Do we have any folks from our energy agencies that would like to tackle that?
Would you mind asking that question one more time? I'm sorry about that.
And it also looks like Masood is prepared to speak too. It's out. If I could go ahead.
Go ahead. I was about to jump in, but since Micah said, can you repeat the question so I make sure I address your question directly? So let's for the sake of time, let me just tell you what I heard, and what I heard from you. It seems like what we are doing in anticipation of making this requirement to go for EV buses and fleets. I am working on the CPUC rates team, and I can tell you in the last 3 years, creating rates for electric vehicles and fleets have been one of our top priorities. As of today, we have for each of the 3 large IOUs in California, SCE, PG&E, and San Diego Gas and Electric, we have approved an electric vehicle rate, which is basically a subsidized rate. The rate is not only encourages charging during the their peak hours and super off-peak and off-peak hours. So our goal is to shift the load from peak hours to super off-peak hours. We understand there are a lot of limitations, especially for the fleets, that they have to get their buses or their fleets charged. So these rates are subsidized rates. All of these rates are in place now in case of San Diego, while San Diego Gas and Electric, while they're doing implementing their rates, we have approved an interim rate, which again, it's a subsidized rate. I can go through the detail of what it means. But for basically for PG&E in San Diego, we introduced this concept of subscription charges. This is for simplicity, I can say that it's similar to a cell phone model that you can sign in for certain usage. And as long as you are in that usage, you can pay that subscription and not pay demand charges. The main reason that it's making charging expensive is this concept of demand charges for medium and large commercial customers that has been, part of their rates, for many, many years. So we're trying to eliminate that. So all utilities have that rate now. At the same time, we directed each utility to come back and give us a proposal with the real-time price. Those are the rates that changes hourly. And again, the idea here is to make sure we take advantage of hours of the day that electricity is cheap. Both San Diego and PG&E have provided those applications. San Diego Gas and Electric, the rate comes as a pilot starting end of this year, and PG&E, same thing. For the SCE also, we're going to have similar real-time pricing. I don't know if I answered that question, Pamela, or not. If not, let me know.
Thanks, Masood. I think it talks a little bit on it with regards to how you're trying to incentivize load flexibility. And I certainly agree with a lot of the points that you made. However, I was looking a little bit further when it comes into grid resiliency and reliability and how you're taking that into account with regards to planning, but also for more responsive, time-sensitive instances, for example, like the public safety power shutoffs. Is there a way that you can have some sort of a service to be able to leverage these vehicles to mitigate service outages? Or for example, in CAISO, right now it's FERC order 2222, V2G and on-site solar and storage are now able to participate in wholesale markets, but still V1G or load management isn't able, at least through that rule, to actively participate and offer like resiliency and reliability services as a paid service outside rates, which could be more responsive and more tailored for specific instances. So how is the state agencies thinking about those instances broader than rates? Is my question.
Great question. I personally don't think I can answer that. As I said, I am in the rates team that our focus is just getting the, rates affordable and encourage load shifting. But in terms of what to do in terms of PSPS or what we can do, I have to get back to you or defer to other folks on the team.
Yeah, I think I can jump in here really quick. I'm not an expert on this, and I wasn't a part of the proceeding that led to this decision, but the CPC recently approved the summer reliability decision, which I believe has some, components of what you're talking about here, where it provides the ability for EVs to participate in the ELRP program, which I do not know what the acronym stands for, but it is essentially a demand response program where it allows the vehicle, if it's, I believe if it's deferring load at certain periods of time or providing any load to the grid during certain periods of time, you will be provided a incentive, which is based off of a fixed dollar amount, I believe. I don't want to give, I'm not fully well versed in this decision, but I'm happy to follow up with you. But I believe this does have some components to how we're incorporating EVs in the future for being a load resource and providing the load shifting roles that we want to see as EV load growth grows, and providing some opportunities to provide some power to the grid when it's no longer, during a PSPS or another de-energization event. And if I can either send you the information through email, or maybe I can just chat the decision number in here to provide some further background.
Okay. Okay. We're going to take one more and then introduce the next topic. Eva, sorry, I'm not sure I can pronounce the last name.
No worries. I'll be happy to wait until you cover the next topic, as my comments cover all topics.
Okay. I'll go ahead and introduce the next topic, which is a lot what we've been talking about. It's a natural bleed over from resiliency and reliability, and that is capacity. I think we've started touching on this with concerns that stakeholders have shared about whether the grid has sufficient capacity to meet the needs of not only the fleets, but all of the other things which are electrifying at the same time. I wanted to start by asking if Quentin wanted to explain load forecasting, and then we'll move into, if there are other comments from other agencies, and then we'll go into open Q&A. So Quentin.
Good. Hi, my name is Quentin G. I'm with the California Energy Commission. I'm the supervisor for the Transportation Energy Forecasting Unit in the Energy Assessments Division. Roughly stated, what we do, basically every other year, updates during off years, we work on our integrated energy policy report and forecast transportation energy demand. This is typically about statewide, I would say roughly, but we also do break this down into 20 forecasting zones throughout the state. That basically means that for example, PG&E comprises several of these zones. SMUD, Sacramento's utility, comprises one. And so what we do is we try to get a sense of, we think about diesel demand, gasoline demand, all kinds of fuels. But of course, the more important one that's the topic of this conversation and of growing interest in our work as well is electricity. We also think about hydrogen. But yeah, basically what we do is we try to get a sense of and forecast a sense of what is energy demand going to look like in these regions and also statewide. We begin our model by basically kind of taking a look at least for the medium and heavy duty sectors, what we do is we take a look at what does the freight, throughout the state look like over the course, of the next 10, 15 years or so. What type of freight is there? How's it being moved? Where is it, one county needs, is growing more than another county, those sorts of things. So we kind of take a look at the economic activity throughout the state and the different kinds of goods and the goods movement. And we get a sense of ton miles of freight. So how many tons over how many miles are we going to anticipate over the next, few years, 10, 15 years or so. So what we do is we get the total amount of ton miles that we need, and we take a look at the amount of vehicles that are in the population currently, and we know that some vehicles are going to leave. Some vehicles are old, some retire, et cetera. So some of these trucks are leaving the population. We've also got increasing demand for those ton miles. So we have a new set of demand for new trucks to service that load, to service those ton miles. So we have a truck choice model that basically takes into account different factors, economic ones, things such as the vehicle price, the cost per mile to drive for fueling, maintenance costs, other sorts of factors like that. And our model sort of estimates or forecasts what decisions will, how will, of let's say 100,000 trucks of different classes are needed. How do we, how will, the economic model will say, like, how will that breakdown look? Are there going to be a lot more electric ones, a lot more hydrogen, fuel cell electric ones? or diesel ones. So we take a look at those different things. We also incorporate things like carbs, heavy duty vehicle incentive program, HVIP. So we take a look at those different factors and we kind of get a sense of what are the new vehicles coming online that are going to be purchased to meet that, movement of freight that we need. And we basically sort of get a new population for each year. And slowly but surely, especially one of the things we're noticing is that vehicle prices, particularly in the MDHD sector, and fleet operators are oftentimes motivated by economic factors more so than other consumers, than say a retail consumer. And so what we see is we see that basically as the prices of these vehicles come down, the other benefits associated with them will lead to additional uptake. And then on top of that, the state, we expect incentives to continue given the budgets that have been put out there. So all of that leads to a total vehicle miles traveled throughout the state of all these different goods moving across and all those different trucks that are satisfying those ton miles. And we get a sense of the total amount of miles that are being traveled by the different truck classes that are out there. You've got your Class 8 tractors and your smaller delivery vans, those sorts of things. And we finally have an output of, how much gasoline are we expecting in a given year? How much diesel are we expecting in a given year? And then primarily how much electricity are we expecting in a given year for the MDHD sector. So that's a kind of rough layout of the overall way that our modeling and our thinking is around these things. We are talking, like you heard from Micah in the previous section, talking about a little bit more granular detail. That is something that we're thinking about as well. We're hoping to take our analysis and framework and begin to coordinate more so with FTD, other stakeholders, to get a more detailed sense. But we're offering kind of the big picture gigawatt hours of electricity, thousands of gigawatt hours of electricity over the course of a single year or so a decade or so. And we're trying to get a sense of what that's going to look like. And hopefully we can use those tools to get a better sense of what is needed at a more granular level.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and jump into our folks who have hands raised.
Sorry, Annalisa,
yeah,
this is
go ahead.
Delphine with the CAISO. Can I just kind of add to what Quentin said, because I think all those points are really important, but I also want to dovetail how the CAISO works with the CEC and potentially the PUC when we're talking about all this. So I think for the audience to keep this in mind, which is the CEC and the PUC kind of jointly, the PUC and all the load serving entities have a lot of the information about kind of where some of that investment might be taking place, whether there's, incentives for electric charging or, the utilities or others are trying to build out some infrastructure. And then the CEC, as Quentin described, is doing that important work of kind of tracking where that vehicle uptake is happening within the industry and then kind of translating all of that into actual electricity usage. What happens there, though, is that it aggregates up into a demand forecast for electricity usage. The demand forecast, and this goes to a couple of the questions that were put out onto the Q&A, which is the demand forecast is both hourly, so we have all 8,760 hours, and if you didn't know that, there's 8,760 hours per year, except in leap years. So you get an hourly profile of every single hour in the year. Plus, as Quentin noted, there's, kind of breakdowns of the geographic footprint within the state of California. So there's also CAISO is only 80% of the state of California. So there's even a CAISO footprint snapshot. And then when CAISO does our planning studies, there's also kind of utility footprint snapshots, which is, and I say utilities a little bit in quotes because it's really, so for example, in the Southern system, you could have the Southern California Edison utility footprint, but embedded in that are some smaller municipal utilities as well. So broadly speaking, the state can get broken down into a couple of these different regions. And for the CAISO, when we work with the CEC on their demand forecast, we take the forecast that has every single hour in the year over a 10-year plus horizon. So this is extremely detailed work. Plus, embedded in that hourly forecast is different layers that you can kind of look at, different layers from electric vehicles, from medium heavy duty vehicles, everything from time of use rates and, you know, behind the meter solar. So there's all these different layers that we have. And then when CAISO takes that forecast, we then further break it down. Also, with the help of the CEC staff, we break it down to, you know, each individual kind of, you know, node on the CAISO system. So we have that really great level of geographic granularity. So we have the hourly shapes of the ultimate kind of net demand when you put everything together. And then we have a geographic view of kind of where that load is increasing. So again, I think, I forgot who made the comment before, you know, we are looking at both the locational aspects of electricity growth due to additional pickup, but also the time differential. So that's also very important. And I think as we're dealing with a lot of, you know, integrating of renewables, you know, we obviously understand when the sun rises and the sun sets, but that also means that that's when the bulk of that, you know, clean energy is on our system. So how do we then either use it wisely with the electrification that we have, or if we need it in time spaces outside of that time, how do we store it into other parts of the day? So I just wanted to kind of provide that background, because again, it's a really good, close working relationship between the CEC, the PUC, and the CAISO in making sure that all of our planning studies are using this singular, you know, forecasting work, a body of work that's extremely detailed and has kind of the best in class data for the state of California. So just wanted to provide that background. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Delphine. Just real quick, yeah, to add on to that, we do these sorts of load profiles as well. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. But one of the key things that we want to keep a close eye to, as Micah mentioned, this heavy load work on the MDHD space. The heavy load work, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. We're working, you know, we're in constant consultation with the National Lawrence LBNL, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, to develop and enhance this model. There's a lot of uncertainties that remain, but we are trying to get a more granular look, both in sort of in a geographic regional, but then also time-wise over those load shifts, you know, peaking of demand at different times of the day, and how that affects the overall grid.
Great, thank you. With that great setup, let's go into comments. Eva.
Thank you, Annalisa. I'm Eva Pleiser, Rancho California Water District, and we are a water and sanitation provider in southwestern Riverside County for about 150,000 people. And I am, you know, our agency is one of probably 4,000 or 5,000 agencies of various size in the state of California that provide water and sewer. And what I would like to give you, this panel, especially the regulatory agencies and the energy providers, is a little boots on the ground experience, because I'm hearing a lot of talk about modeling and how the models, what the models say and so forth. But when you come in from somebody like us, we, you know, we have 8 megawatts of solar that we utilize. You know, we've done everything we possibly can to optimize our system, but we don't have the luxury of taking 3 days off when there's a PSPS event and saying, well, sorry, you can't go poop today because there's a PSPS and we can't pump your sewer out. So that is not an option. It's a basic sanitation need. So when we look at it and we look at capacity, reliability, and resiliency, it is critical that the energy sector provides a very resilient and reliable system. And right now that's not there. We have at least 1 or 2 PSPS events a year. We are under at least 1 or 2 brownouts a year. we made investments in generators for our critical facilities, but if we have to add vehicles on top of that, that's going to be, it's going to be extremely difficult to operate a system that doesn't have a resilient energy to support it. To give you examples, this is just recent. Some of our sister agencies, we had serious winter storms this December. They were out of power for 1 to 2 weeks. So not only are their facilities out of power, you're talking about water and sewer facilities, but if they're out of power, they can't charge their heavy duty vehicles. And they use their heavy duty vehicles to power those facilities because they can transport fuel to those facilities. So if electrification is pushed of fleets without resiliency and capacity and reliability, we're looking at potentially substantial public hardships and disasters for sanitation and water supply. So when you talk modeling, when you talk all that, think about the boots on the ground and what we have to do every day to meet the basic needs. I'll give you an example. We looked at one well, serves about 2,000 acre feet of water a year. We looked at putting a solar backup power, and when we did the calculations, we would have needed about a football field of batteries to provide the power needed to this installation to back up, to provide backup if there's a reliability issue with a energy provider. So there's significant technology issues just on the power. And I heard, a comment, hey, you got to become your own power provider for these emergencies. That is, to me, that's not a viable option for us. We don't have the land. I don't have the land to put in a football fields of batteries at every installation that we have. It's not viable. It's not going to happen. For our facilities, we need a resilient, reliable grid that has the capacity. But from a perspective of a fleet, that needs to be there, because if we're asked to charge and we can't deliver whatever fuel, if we can't deliver auxiliary power to these facilities, we're can't provide basic service. So that is very critical to us. So when I hear the conversations, I think what needs to be considered is not just capacity and all those aspects, but implementation timelines. Right now, the rule that's being proposed has a start of an implementation of 2024, where we have to start buying electric vehicles. I would say that's unrealistic, given what the grid is and what the grid is doing. And I've heard 10 years, that it's going to take 10 years plus to get a grid where we're going to have reliability and capacity. I don't know what to, well, all of you are toilet users. I'm going to tell you, buy some buckets, because we won't be able to provide that reliability to you. So this is a tremendous concern. So my questions would be like, hey, when do you see having enough capacity on the grid where this reliability issue is no longer significant? And how is CARB thinking now? Okay, are there any changes? Is there anything we're going to do with these regulations to make sure that we can do our business? So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Do we have any state partners that would like to weigh in?
Yeah, those definitely sound like important challenges. What we're trying to do is our role, at least my role, our team's role, is to kind of give a sense of, how will the additional vehicles add on to, that existing demand. And I think it does bring up important questions about reliability, but also knowing, if we're going to add this many more vehicles, we need to think about this much more demand. I mean, I think that's important information, and that's what we can say. If the plan is to do this, we're going to need a certain amount of additional charging load, and there are certainly other important questions to address as well in that entire planning process.
I can also add, we work closely with Quentin's team with his transportation energy demand forecast in our modeling efforts, not only for the medium and heavy duty vehicles, but we include them as well on our grid impact analysis. But we can only do so much to show the problem in its full detail but it's really, hinged on the partnerships and collaborations that we have working with the utility companies, because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for planning for this load. They have control of the grid, they operate the grid, and so we can work with them as much as possible, and we do. We really want to show that information to them, to show exactly where we think things are going to be happening in terms of the massive load that's going to be growing over the next 10 or 15 years, as Quentin mentioned. But it's really this to answer your question, Ava, it's really contingent on how we work together with the utilities in order to address those concerns that we've identified or are planning to identify.
Thank you. And if there's any other questions, if you want boots on the ground input, how water industry support, what their needs are, Micah, Quentin, please feel free to contact us directly. And I know our industry is very eager to work with you because I don't want you to have to invest in your own buckets.
Thank you. Okay, Kim.
Hi, my name is Kim Okafor. I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me unless I start seeing people shake their heads. I work at Trillium, and Trillium is a member of the Love's family of companies. So I represent both Trillium and Love's truck stops and travel centers. Love's has a network of almost 600 truck stops across the country. Some of those truck stops are in California. I kind of wanted to say what our concern is and then ask a question. So as we build new truck stops in California, we recognize that we have things like the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, where our customers are going to have to, have zero emission fueling necessities that would need to be at our truck stops. There aren't that many out there right now. So putting in the infrastructure doesn't make economic sense for us at this point. But we know we're going to have to need it in the future. So the question is twofold. One, to kind of the power industry experts on the phone from folks like CEC, CPUC, CAISO, and then for CARB. One, as we plan for the future and we're putting in truck stops now, it doesn't make sense for us to put in 1 megawatt chargers for trucks that aren't able to do that now. But from our OEM partners, we're hearing that that's what's going to be coming. So how do we plan for that, right? How do we make sure that the grid is able to quickly put in that power at a point when we do need it? And then secondly, is there a way, and now I'm kind of going into funding a little bit, so I may be jumping the gun, Annalisa, but I know we have FCI for light duty vehicles. One way to help us make economic sense of putting in very heavy charging infrastructure for the trucks that are coming in the future is to have FCI for heavy duty infrastructure. I know we don't have that now. What are CARB's thoughts on that for moving that into the future? Or moving that along.
And I'm going to clarify, FCI, is that the low carbon fuel standard?
Yes, the LCFS capacity credit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can address that quickly. I don't think we have an LCFS staffer on the line today, but I know the team is looking at that. The challenge is the LCFS regulation, that's the low carbon fuel standard, isn't due for a revisit for amendments until after the scoping plan. And my recollection is we're looking at 2024. So the timing doesn't line up ideally, but I know that the staff are looking at this. The request has been heard, it's loud and clear, and it's definitely something that we're recognizing would make a difference. So we're keeping that conversation going, and I'm actually meeting with that team later this week. And all of the comments that we've been receiving in these work group meetings has really helped to distill exactly what the impact would be, how beneficial it would be to have those credits. So I'm going to make sure that that's communicated to the team.
This is Leslie. I wanted to just chime in for a second. I've been hearing so many good questions coming out of the fleet customers, and I believe in this particular panel, we did want to reserve some time for our utility partners to talk about the future, like how they handle and prepare their grids within their territories for these future loads. I know that kind of goes into the next section, and it bleeds into how utilities work with fleet customers to do this. But I don't know, what do you think? Should we move that conversation to the next panel, just to make sure that we are responding to all of our panelists and our participants in the Q&A box, that there is a method to the madness on how utilities work with their customers to make sure their needs are being met, and make sure a lot of these questions are being answered.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I can wait.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then on
let's go ahead and-
costs and funding, next work group meeting, we'll dig into that like in depth. Yeah.
So Catherine, would you like to invite your informal subpanel of utilities to give some brief remarks on their planning and things and capacity building, and then we can carry on with this conversation, which will morph from capacity into timing.
Yes, I'd like to have Vishal Patel from Southern California Edison say a few words about how you look at that load capacity. We've heard, as Annalisa has stated, we've heard the Cal ISO experience. We know what the CPUC is doing, and we've heard about the Energy Commission, the California Energy Commission. And if you could spend just a little bit of time, maybe a super high level overview about what you guys are doing to forecast these loads and what you're doing in your planning to make sure the lights will go on when people need it. And then after Vishal, I'd like to go to James from PG&E and then Eric from SMUD to finalize that comments. So Vishal, please open up your mic.
Hey, Kathy, I hope you don't mind me interrupting for just 1 second on this. I want our utilities also to be very cognizant of one of the questions that come in the chat and have been spoken verbally about how you're also addressing the fact that fleets cannot always take advantage of super low TOU rates. I want to make sure that that's on everyone's radar. We are hearing you that trucks need to plug in when they need to plug in, and they can't always take advantage of that. So if you can include those in the remarks about your programs, we would very much appreciate it.
Leslie, the idea on the rates was we were going to do that after Michael from CPUC covers it. That's at the 10:45.
Okay.
If we could
minutes ago.
For fear that we might not get there, but yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. You're right. We were planning on doing that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we got these three identified: James, Vishal, James, and then Eric. And then we have different people scheduled for the rates. Thank you.
Okay,
well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully, you can hear me. I'll look for head nods or thumbs up. And apologize for the video connection here. My IT on the work computer was blocking me, so I switched to an iPad. Really, a lot of good conversation here, and I think each of the topics, I commend CARB and the state agencies and others for putting this together to talk about it. It's a topic that's very close to my heart and those at Edison as well. I think, Southern California Edison serves about 50,000 square miles in central and southern portions of California, with more than kind of 5 million customer accounts and all varieties of customers from residential, commercial, industrial, for those that might not be familiar with us. So pretty large electric utility. We're electric only. And I lead the electric system planning organization at Southern California Edison, where we do the electrical engineering analysis for the power grid. And You heard from others at the CEC. They really provide us the load forecast at a system level. We work with the CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, on the planning and operations of the large wires that you see. Kind of think of them as interstate highways. And we work with the CPUC very closely on the planning of the distribution system. Those are the wires that come to all your houses and workplaces, provide power there. The unique thing about medium duty and heavy duty is really the magnitude of load that you're going to be bringing onto the system from an electric system perspective with these new uses. People have talked about, whether it's Tesla Semi or, Daimler trucks or Volvo, whoever it is, hundreds of kilowatts to maybe even megawatts of charging, depending on the time and the application and the use case that you have for your vehicle. And I think those this characteristic on the grid is something that of that magnitude that if we had it before, it wasn't in the volume that you're going to have it now. So the way that we plan the system is it's kind of a bottoms up and top down. A lot of the assumptions that go into the planning from the highest voltage levels down the transmission system, as people were alluding to, we rely on inputs on what is our resource mix, what is our load forecast that comes and that's mandated on that we use that by the state agencies, and that comes from the state agencies that we're speaking. At the same time, people talked about the bottoms up and the boots on the ground. The information that we get from customers really informs kind of how our system is growing. And so a lot of times customers come to us, and this somewhat is about the following topic, but I'd say the key thing is lead time. Letting us know sooner than later that you're planning to electrify is one of the most important things. You might not know exactly what you're going to buy and what volume even, but just saying, okay, I'm going to electrify and this is my location. Getting that discussion started is really important for the utility to be aware, so we can put that into our processes and say, okay, these are customers in these areas that are looking at that. We have our own internal projections of, you can look at a Google Earth and say there's a ton of warehouses in these areas, but for us to kind of do it helps in our due diligence when we can say we have an actual customer outreach telling us I'm interested in doing X, Y, Z, and that's going into our forecast from the bottoms up on the distribution level. There's two websites I'm going to mention, sc.com, but /CRT, that's Charge Ready Transport. That'll talk about all of our programs that we have available, with including funding and process and how to reach out. But even if you're not interested in that funding, there's also contacts in there to how to reach out to Edison and say, hey, I'd like to learn more, or I'm interested in doing electric transport, medium and heavy duty at some point. At the same time, there is also another link that we have, sc.com/TEAS, Transportation Electrification Advisory Services. This is something that SC offers to our customers to tell them more about what it takes to electrify. So lots more information there, but really the biggest thing is customer outreach. And I saw a presentation earlier, that sea of red that you see across California, that's informed by our what we call integration capacity analysis tool. That's something that's relatively new in the utility industry. California has been the leader, and the IOUs in California have been doing that, in partnership and in response to the CPUC's kind of requests of us through various efforts, and it continues to improve. One thing that you'll want to note on there is, and you can find that if you search on Google, the website is kind of complicated. It's SCE and then DRPEP, Dr. Pep. And they'll give you a map of the whole SC system, and you can click on kind of very granular portions of the grid without having too much detail if you're looking for a specific location. But the load ICA is kind of a snapshot in time and takes into account other information and more details about the grid. But oftentimes there could be missing information, and so we're working on improving that, and the CPUC and others are aware of this. And so there's something that we call in there, if you click on that, called reserve capacity. That can also give you an indicator of, okay, there might be some capacity actually on the circuit, even though this load ICA is saying 0. So there's a lot more details in there. There's load profiles out throughout the year. If you're application that's going to, your trucking application is going to be charging at nighttime, right? There still might be capacity to get you that power. So I know I've said a lot there, a lot of different topics, but I want to leave time for and opportunities for my peers at the other utilities to kind of touch on topics that I may not have covered.
Thank you so much. Before we jump to James, I wanted you guys to know Brandon's put in the chat those websites from the SCE, and it's really great to hear that, the customers, so you fleets that are looking to electrify, make sure you start that conversation so that your utility is aware of what's going to be needed moving forward, and then they'll be able to put that in their planning documents, which will then coordinate with that state level planning. James, please take it away.
All right. Good morning again, everyone. James Tissil with PG&E, responsible for our distribution planning and capacity program. I just wanted to echo just a common theme and sentiment, and I really appreciate the just honest and upfront input that's been provided in this forum. We are here to serve the communities that we live in and we operate in, and we procure goods and services in, be it from a sewer service provider to an Amazon warehouse to a Tesla charging station or other. And so I think really at the end of the day, right, we talk a lot about high level forecasting, planning, but really having that local feel of the communities that we serve and where those needs are today, not just 5 years down the road, 10 years, but what's the needs today of some of our most critical partners in our service territory is really the most essential part of our distribution planning process. So I think the key I would like to build off of Vishal's comments was that partnership in getting information up front as quickly as possible. So if we're talking of warehouse electrification, are we talking fleet charging locations, whatever it is, getting the dialogue with the utility as quickly as possible really helps to eliminate the barriers in terms of the lead times and the infrastructure upgrades that may be required. In parallel to that, we will continue to focus on our analytics around predicting adoption, predicting where we see propensity towards certain electrification and EV expansion in our territory, working with the CEC, working with the energy division, but really like it's a combined effort, right? It's where the needs are right now today and how are we solving them with infrastructure, and then also where do we see trends occurring on the system, and where can we hopefully be proactive, right? We don't always want to be in this reactive state. We want to be proactive to where we know there's certain locations that are no regrets areas where we can invest and open up infrastructure to see our partners be successful. We do have a big effort going on similar to SCE where we are expanding our predictive models. We're using industry partners, some that are on this call today, to provide great insight and analysis of where we expect to see fleets grow, both on a transportation level and in a warehouse and industrial setting. And all this is also coupled with electrification, right, which is a whole nother piece of it, right, where we're seeing large commercial buildings, residential converting to electric demands as well. It's all incorporated into our singular forecast model on a distribution level that is really going to help drive our no regrets investment decisions. And at the end of the day, when we tie this all back to reliability, right, I think a lot of us know, right, capacity kind of equals reliability in this setting. So we want to make sure that the investment decisions that we make aren't just there to serve the capacity needs of the system at a single point in time and location, but are there to also serve as redundant supplies, working with automated demand response, ALM, and those types of flexible grid technologies will allow us to be able to move load around on the grid, as was spoken to earlier, to help provide more resiliency. So really looking forward to that partnership. I'm very excited to be a part of this this community of very thoughtful and knowledgeable industry and customer subject matter experts, and definitely welcome the dialogue. We'll post the links as well to more information about PG&E specific programs and methodology that's being instituted, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Eric, please unmic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess I can echo some of those things. I think, you know, it's been said once or twice, I'll say it again. The earlier that we can be in contact with our customers on this, the better. You know, we recognize there's going to be potentially longer lead times on, you know, depending on, you know, what the site needs are. And we understand that it's different from site to site. So it's extremely important that, you know, fleets out there, you know, that we basically are reaching out to our customers, and our customers, our commercial customers, understand that we, the utility, are here to help, really. And in line with that, we similarly are launching a what we're calling our SMUD e-Fuel Advisor Program. And it's probably along the lines of some of the things SoCal Edison and others have, but the notion being here that it's a resource to help fleets of all different sizes and stripes, and essentially create plans, develop plans to help them transition, basically to understand electric fuel and electric vehicle space, as well as to transition into electric vehicles in I guess, along a time horizon and in a way that is in keeping with their mission critical needs. So we consider that to be key. You know, we're going to be launching this here about, you know, I think next quarter, Q2 of this year. The advisors, we also have a solutions service that will, you know, actually not only develop those plans, but install and maintain and operate those equipment for fleets as well. So, you know, we're basically putting it out there to be a trusted resource, as we know many of these fleets will likely be approached by a number of different entities offering various services and offering different promises. And, you know, we've heard from our fleet customers that they really do value us as a trusted source, an unbiased one in that regard. So these services, I think, are key for them in order to weigh their, you know, their opportunities. We've also launched a big effort as well to really understand our fleet customers better and their needs. We just completed a fleet study with a major research firm that helped us, number one, conduct interviews with a number of cross-section of fleets and commercial customers in our service territory. And then, not just interviews, but also helping us understand who the biggest ones are, you know, what their electrification plans are or might be, and to help us really focus on who and which of the fleets are the most likely to electrify and could potentially have the biggest impact, and therefore require the most, I think, hand-holding and engagement as early as possible. With that, also there's forecast work that we're doing to help us understand where these loads are going to land, to help us invest in infrastructure and upgrades, and help us target upgrades, and as well steer fleets toward solutions that that are more the low-hanging fruit, the lower cost-effective, and efficient solutions for them, and that require the least amount of upgrades in the near term. Longer upgrade stuff, would be along a longer time horizon as they transition over time. We also are we're awarded an Energy Commission grant to do a full regional planning effort to create a blueprint for our entire Sacramento region. And we're working with a number of our partners that include our SACOG and our AQMDs and others in our region to create a region-wide goods movement plan to understand, where we need both depot solutions as well as en route solutions, looking at both charging for electric vehicles as well as hydrogen and hydrogen refueling.
Thank you so much. Annalisa, were you gonna go ahead and take some questions?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that information. Those of you who just spoke on behalf of the utilities. I'd like to go now to Chris Shimoda.
Hi, good morning. Chris Shimoda, California Trucking Association. And I actually have some comments all the way back to Micah's slide at the beginning of the presentation. And this is geared towards capacity, so I apologize, Annalisa, going back one subject. So specific to that slide Micah presented on the EDGE tool, wanted to just raise a couple of issues where I think that the map that was shown with all that red, which basically indicates that we've got a huge chunk of the circuits out there that do not have a lot of excess capacity. That's really consistent with what we saw with the release of Dr. Pep. Tends to not necessarily, you tend to not necessarily have a huge amount of excess megawatts on these address specific circuits. And so just wanted to make a quick comment on that, just on the site specific project level. You tend to have a lot of variability in medium and heavy duty projects. I think that most of the folks on this line probably know that. If you're looking at a depot charging style scenario where the fleet has, let's call it 8 to 10 hours to charge, you're probably going to have more of a like 19 to 50 kilowatt capacity charger grouping within that project. And you can get, if you just do the quick math, 100 19 kilowatt chargers into a location for under 2 megawatts per project. Whereas once we start getting out of that depot charging, return to home base with an extended period to charge type fleet, which the current advanced clean fleets, as well as the ACT for that matter, proposes to do, you start getting into some different scenarios where, for instance, when you go up to a 350 kilowatt capacity charger, 10 of those chargers are going to generate a 3.5 megawatt demand. When we start talking about megawatt plus charging, you're getting 2 chargers in one location before you exceed the 2 megawatt level. And so wanted to sort of raise this both for the utilities as well as the folks doing this analysis that, we're really going to have a large amount of variability in the kind of projects that we see. And as we start getting into these higher capacity chargers, you're going to run into the constraints at the address specific level on that circuit fairly quickly and widely. Given the fact that we're not doing a rule that is solely based on return to home base, depot charging with extended periods to do that charging. And so moving from the grid side to sort of overall capacity, I did just want to highlight some things in the analysis done in heavy, which was a great analysis done by the CEC team. So in the medium and heavy duty space, for the 21-27 report, it's my understanding that CEC analyzed 141,000, or basically their analysis suggests for 180,000 trucks, the possible daily demand is going to peak out at about 2 gigawatts. And that is based on 141,000 50 kilowatt chargers and then 16,350 kilowatt capacity chargers. And did want to point out that the population in the Advanced Clean Fleets rule by 2040 is expected to reach 400,000. So more than double the amount of trucks that were analyzed in the 21-27 report. And in addition to that, with just 16,350 kilowatt capacity chargers, I think that that's shortchanging the possible overall demand that is actually going to be coming online with the advent of that rule. If you are going to drive the charging times down to something that is going to be acceptable for the regular route opportunity charging, 350 kilowatts is probably the absolute minimum charging speed that you would want to install for instance, retail locations or other opportunity type charging. As you start seeing the advent of megawatt plus charging, that is going to really blow out some of those hourly demand windows. I think if you, again, just do very simple math, there's approximately 400,000 Class 8 vehicles operating in California at any given time. If you were to have 10% of those plugged into a megawatt plus charger at any given time, the possible demand is going to be huge. You're talking about, in the many multiple gigawatts, type demand. So just did want to sort of give that color on, I think the agencies are doing some very good analysis, but there is a lot of uncertainty and possibility for the reality of what these things are actually going to look like, especially as we get into those higher charging speeds, to be significantly higher than what are in those reports. So thank you.
Yeah, I can just make a quick comment about that. This is Micah from the CEC. So two things, you mentioned one thing about the map that was shown and how it kind of reflects what you've seen in the past. So I think it was mentioned earlier by one of the utility partners, but this is only kind of just like a snapshot of the grid at the time that the analysis was conducted, and the data that specifically goes into the Edge tool for this is updated monthly. Sorry, I got my daughter with me here. Anyway, at this point in time, the data that goes into Edge doesn't really have a temporal sort of forecasting component to the grid side of things. That's kind of one of the primary things that we're working on in terms of the modeling side for the grid capacity analysis specifically. And then to comment really quickly on something you said about sort of your power level, what the comments you made on the power level. So heavy load, and specifically what was presented in the recent 2127 report over last summer, only included sort of 2 bins of power. I think, you may have seen it was a 50 kilowatt and a 350 kilowatt charger. Those types of power, but right now sort of phase 2 of heavy load is being actively developed, which is going to be a lot more detailed. We're calling it a bottom-up approach. It includes that daily truck simulation that I mentioned earlier, as well as additional sort of bins of power level that go, actually I have the information in front of me, they go from anywhere from the 50 kilowatt that we have, which is considered sort of an overnight charger, all the way up to between 1 and 4 megawatts. And so these are the types of things that we're sort of considering in the future for the heavy load model. It's just at this point taking some time to develop the phase 2 more detailed analysis, if you will. But the 2127 analysis is also sort of an ongoing effort, and more of that information will be included in future reports. So just keep an eye out for that. Thanks for your comments.
Yeah, I apologize. Just a quick follow-up, Micah, because you jogged my memory of something I didn't say. Number one, great to hear that that's going to be included. I think that is going to be more reflective of what the future is going to look like. But also, I forgot to sort of complete the thought on what the implication of the circuits being so constrained are. And we definitely appreciate, it's a snapshot. It's not necessarily inclusive of what things are going to look like as both capacity is added, but also new demand added. That was a disclaimer from SCE when they presented Dr. Pep is, look, this is what it looks like now. We don't know what it's going to look like in a year when you do your project. So I think the important point here is that given the size of these projects, for instance, you could say, okay, well, a full depot conversion of a last mile delivery fleet, we can get that done for under 2 megawatts, but you don't know that next door there's not a similar kind of fleet or another kind of fleet bringing on additional megawatts onto that same circuit. And so I think the point that I was really trying to highlight is that I think the vast majority of medium and heavy duty projects, especially as it becomes more common, is going to trigger a lot of those utility side upgrades, which just naturally extend out the time frame. All due respect to folks who are saying we're going to avoid the utilities completely. It's my understanding it takes roughly 100,000 square feet to get a megawatt of solar on. I just don't see that as necessarily being a total substitute for having to deal with the utility side upgrade. So just a point, kind of on that circuit specific level, we are going to be triggering a lot of utility side upgrades, transmission line, substation upgrades, and that timeline needs to really be, I think, highlighted in this analysis. So thanks.
Yep, completely agree with you. And that really just highlights a point that I made earlier in how critical it is in having those partnerships with the utility companies. Since we're working our hardest to identify these barriers within regions and to work with them to streamline the processes as much as possible. So definitely appreciate your comment there. And I will say that we've been working with the utilities at this point on sort of how we can collaborate the best in order to provide the best set of solutions for folks who want to install these types of infrastructure projects. So yeah, appreciate your comments there for sure. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, I'd like to call on Edward Phillips.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. So I appreciate all the comments by the panelists and others, and I'd like to ask a question that I don't think's been answered. I think this is my third workshop as a panelist, and I think the fundamental question about this is how much energy is going to be needed. And I think before we answer any of these other questions about resiliency, reliability, build out planning, the rate structures, load management, we need to really understand exactly how much power is going to be needed, whether that's electricity or hydrogen or something else. And to give some perspective on that, and I appreciate some of the comments Chris just made, was we've been adopting battery electric technology at several of our locations in California. We have battery electric yard trucks working at 3 locations in California. They consume around 20 I just went and checked this with my energy manager. They consume about 20 kilowatt hours per hour, and they run about, realistically around 12 hours a day is when they're using that energy, and we get some regenerative braking back from them. But for a small facility where we have 20 trucks, that's roughly 4.8 megawatt hours per day is the energy demand. And then we have a larger facility that has around 200 trucks, and of course that's about 48 megawatt hours per day. And we're talking about the ACF here, but if you think about all the other sectors that are going to need energy, we have about 6,600 locomotives. If we were to prove the technology and purchase a small subfleet of locomotives that operated, let's say, just in the South Coast Air Basin, let's say it was 300 locomotives, and they needed about 6 megawatt hours per day, you're talking about, just for a very small subfleet of locomotives, which is less than 5% of our total fleet, energy demand of about 1.8 gigawatt hours per day. We're not the only company in town that moves goods. So if you were to round up for all the locomotives, you're talking roughly 4 gigawatt hours per day. So I think the fundamental question that needs to be answered before we keep asking these other questions and having these other conversations is about how much energy we're going to need in this state. And so far, I don't think I've heard anybody throw out that number, but it's a lot. It's going to be a lot of energy. I mean, just the trucks alone are going to be in, as Chris said, in the gigawatt hours on a daily basis. And then you talk about load management and then rate structures. Not everybody can charge overnight. I mean, a lot of these companies are 24 hours a day, as we are. So we're going to be charging throughout the 24-hour cycle. So, when you talk about planning, then you have to work with the end users. And I heard everything the utilities have said about working with the utilities early. And we've done that at these facilities where we've installed electric technology. But and I've said this before, I think my biggest concern is, given human nature, what's going to happen with the ACF is that people are going to wait until the year before they have a 10% or 25% requirement. And I'm really concerned about the utilities' ability to install new service. So I don't know what the number is today, but let's say one of the utilities has 1,000 new service requests or 10,000 new service requests each year. And, in 2023 or 2024, when the 10% requirement kicks in, is that going to go up by 10x? Are they going to have 10 times the number of new service requests? And how are they going to address that? How are they going to be able to bring new service in that timely manner so that the entities can meet their commitments under the ACF? Thank you.
Edward, this is Diego with Daimler Trucks North America. We haven't looked at it for California specifically, but we have looked at what is the required growth in energy production if the entire medium heavy duty industry transitioned to battery electric. So the US generated at a peak in 2000 about 4,000 terawatt hours. If we assume every medium and heavy duty vehicle switches to battery electric, it would be about a 20% increase in power generation required additional. But if you look at the trend of energy generation since 1950, it's grown exponentially. We've kind of peaked a bit because with the drop in coal, but there's a huge increase in renewable generation and natural gas. The peak is primarily due to the drop in coal generation, but historically we've grown new generation quite quickly.
So Diego, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that number. Is that, you think with the 20% increase, is that 5 terawatts?
Yeah, about 5,000 terawatt hours.
5,000.
From 4,000 to about 5,000.
I can provide a little bit of.
Go ahead, Quinn.
I can do what I can to try to answer your question, Edward. And thank you, Diego. That's an important addition there. When in our statewide transportation energy demand forecast does have a range of kind of expected values of gigawatt hours, and it is in the tens of thousands. I can in the chat in a second here post a link to the results of our 2021 Integrated Energy Policy Report forecast. In that forecast, or at least some of the slides, the presentation slides that we have, in that, if we take a look maybe at 2030 as a kind of general target, although there's a chart that shows every year, but looking at 2030 as a general target, we have 3 different cases, a low, medium, and high case. Just sort of taking the mid case for total transportation electricity demand, that would even include things like electric, subway cars and things like that. We're looking at about 22,000 gigawatt hours over the course of that year. The vast majority of that is going to be charging light duty vehicles, which do have a little bit more flexible load. But I don't think this is in the slides, but I had actually run these numbers a little bit before. I don't want to be like fully, this is precise, but I think it's approximately about 10% or so of that 20,000, maybe a little bit more than 10%, approaching maybe 3,000 gigawatt hours statewide. So we have a rough sense, in that overall picture. And as we discussed before, I think Delphine mentioned that we do kind of look at an hourly breakdown. There's improvements that we're working on with that model, but we can get a sense of how that model could look over the course of a typical day, a breakdown of those 3,000 gigawatt hours. So I hope that answers your kind of big picture question.
Well, it does in a sense. I guess I would go back to the utilities and CAISO and everyone and ask, where are we now? And if that's the projection, given permitting, planning, build out, where the energy needs to be delivered, all those sorts of questions, are we going to be able to meet that under the ACF and other regulations that are coming out that are also going to require zero emission technology? So that's a big concern. Are the regulations out ahead of the energy supply? And will we be able to meet the energy supply that the regulations are mandating? It's a huge question. And I hear everyone speak about certain pieces of this, but I don't know that anyone has definitively said, yes, we're going to be able to meet this before the ACF triggers those requirements, and the other regulations that are coming forth, which is TRUs, off-road, zero-emission forklifts, et cetera.
I think one thing, though, is that all of those regulations were introduced with a very long timeline. And so on one hand, you think about the energy needs increasing gradually. So it's like, okay, yes, will we need terawatts more of energy than we have today? Of course. But do we need them all at once? No. And are they being ramped up in parallel is, I think, a better question for fleets to consider, because it doesn't really matter if you don't have enough power in somebody else's yard. It matters if you have enough in yours. And so if you can get solar, if you can get a battery, if your interconnection project is covered, it's basically, can we align the deployment of that percentage of the market to where the infrastructure can be ready fastest so that we can get those emissions benefits faster? And if there is going to be a shortage in our ability to hit all of the goals, is there a way that regulators can push to make sure that our air quality non-attainment areas and our deployments map up so that we can do the most good fastest?
Irvi, I'm sorry, I would tend to disagree with you on the drayage sector, considering there's an entry standard starting as early as November of 2023 in an industry that traditionally does not own the land that they're operating on. So just with that caveat, I understand what you're saying, but I think it's very clear here today that there are many challenges at hand, but the timelines aren't as long as we're making it out to be. We're less than 2 years away from an entry standard here, impacting every intermodal vehicle that's identified as drayage in California. So sorry to interrupt everybody.
Thanks. I appreciate the back and forth conversation. I think that's helpful. And I think one of the messages that you're pointing out, Edward, is the need for communication. You pointed out that fleets are inclined to wait until they have to do something. But I think a message that we're hearing pretty clearly from the utilities and other partners is the earlier communication can start about plans for transitioning to zero emission, the better things will be able to be addressed and services provided.
I think another thing based on Matt's comment that's worth considering is that when there is that disconnect between when the fleet is required to act and when the infrastructure needs to be there, we need to have more things like the warehouse rule that are going to push landlords who do not own vehicles to be ready for their tenants. Because I don't know who's going to win the e-commerce battle for, selling the most shoes, if it's going to be Zappos or Amazon, et cetera. But I do know there will be a truck and it will likely be renting a facility. And so I think we need to keep that kind of focus of the warehouse might have a different tenant, but it's still going to need the infrastructure.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and it's not part of the agenda here today, but don't forget the public fueling and charging, because, and I don't know, Chris, if you can answer this question, but a huge percentage of the drayage trucks and over the road heavy duty trucks use public fueling today, and they're going to need to use public charging, public fueling in the future. It's not just the private.
Yeah, vast majority, Eddie.
And I'll just chime in that next, the final meeting, we will be bringing the folks from CEC. They're going to help to really lead that meeting. And part of the whole Energize program is not only having funding for infrastructure, but also thinking strategically about where to place it. So we'll definitely want to hear from you then. On public, I'm talking about.
Okay. Can we move to Kevin Hamilton? Actually, hi. Kevin, I'm sorry. Before we go to you, I did want to do a time check. We're at less than 20 minutes before our scheduled end time. I'm fine with continuing on. This is clearly a rich conversation that is moving as fast as it needs to because we have so much to talk about. I can tack on as much as another hour, but I wanted to hear from panelists if they're able to stay on the line and continue the conversation.
I can do another hour. I can eat on the fly or not eat at all.
I cannot. I have to drop off at noon.
Okay.
I also need to drop off at noon.
Okay, understood.
Also need to drop off at noon.
All right.
As do I.
Okay, understood. I think what I'll do is continue as we're going. I will take the last 15 minutes before noon to do a summary of where we are, what we've heard, but then we'll go ahead and continue with those who can continue and try and pack in as much as we can.
We are at 15 before noon.
Yes. Oh, good point. Okay.
Actually, we're at 17 before noon.
Yes.
But
okay. Let's go ahead with Kevin and
Lisa?
Yes.
This is Ruben. Sorry, but I also have a hard stop at around 11:50.
Okay.
So I'll be dropping off as well.
Okay.
I apologize.
I think people could probably write it in the chat if they have to leave, right? So we can get the comments finished.
Yep.
Just
All right.
saying.
Sounds good. All right, Kevin, go ahead.
So, just quick here, if you move to the coast of the mountains, people often tell you, bring your own job. In this case, I think we're relying on the state to provide a grid and grid infrastructure and the utilities that are going to meet all of our needs. And I think we need to look to examples where that's not happening. Chris alluded to the challenges here. I think that's what you were alluding to, Chris, when you said you need 100,000 acres for so many megawatts. But I was at the groundbreaking of the Watt EV project down in Bakersfield a few weeks ago. Looking at projects like that where the company is putting in their own solar field to power their own Class 8 vehicle support electric truck stop, even bringing vehicles along with it, and a new business model for leasing those, which is a separate issue, but also offering that charging to the community, to other truckers that want to stop and charge. And presently, with the field operating on 5 acres, is able to meet the needs of about 40 trucks for 3 duty cycles during a 12-hour period. And once their batteries are in place, we'll be handling many, many more. And the field is expanded to 100 acres. They'll be generating over 1 gigawatt. So, I think solar has evolved significantly and is able to concentrate a lot more electricity on smaller square footages. But I think there's a mixture that has to happen here, and the investment has to happen that way. And I wonder how, my question is, how is CEC taking into account the expansion of facilities of that type? And when I think about this, I think about Trillium actually and Love's truck stops, because it's kind of an ideal thing for them. They build solar fields. They own one of the biggest truck stop entities in the world, probably, certainly in the country. I rely on them when I'm traveling across country all the time. And there's a lot of open land. The field doesn't need to be next to the actual operation. And so it seems to me that this is a strategy that we should be including moving forward, and focusing as much as possible at first funding these kinds of operations, and then second, with CARB failing to complete their freight handbook, chapter 1, that would have provided more direction to these distribution centers and warehouses, and therefore allowed us to advocate for more funding to support them to put solar on every flat surface that they own, including the trucks. I think that's the other way we need to be going as well, and to increase the capacity of the grid and the initial power sources. So this stuff can't all move across California. A lot of it's just going to have to be generated locally and move locally. I just don't see how in this timeline we can expand the grid to meet all the demands of the regulation and legislation. More to come as well, right? So with this compressed timeline, I mean, that's my comment. And my question is, how are you taking those kinds of facilities into models like the EDGE model to kind of begin to fill in those gaps and maybe identify places where this is the best strategy to use to fill in those gaps? Thank you. I was brief.
Thanks. Do we have a CEC person who'd like to address that?
Hey, sorry, I didn't quite catch the full question, but Kevin, would you mind emailing me? I think it would be probably more beneficial to discuss this over email, or perhaps offline, and that way we can get into the meat of it.
Sure, it's really about how you're taking the external or independently developed new energy sources into that whole calculus of meeting the demands of the MHD, HD fleets as they convert to electricity. Right now, it seems to be basically built on the existing grid's capacity and then forecasting need for the grid. But is it taking into consideration these new efforts, which have been primarily focused at sourcing residential power, especially in the Valley, sort of sending it up to San Francisco or down to LA. But now when we're looking at the goods movement corridor, especially, really moving that power generation and those sources closer where the need is, closer together. And so, how is your model taking that into consideration? We can certainly talk about that offline if you need it.
Yeah, I can just comment really quickly for you though. I mean, we are always in search of new sources of data and information to integrate into the model. It's been quite difficult to get the proper data to sort of paint the best picture in the medium and heavy duty space in particular for our modeling efforts. And so, I mean, if you have suggestions or any, further sources of information that you'd like to provide for us to include in our models, then happy to hear it. Much appreciated if you can help us out in that regard.
I wish I had that level of expertise, Micah. I would have a better job than just leading a small nonprofit here, but which is actually one of the greatest jobs in the world, quite honestly. But certainly we can talk about what kind of projects are already on the ground and, what I think a lot of us see coming. And I think the conversation is more, you've got these two methodologies for generating energy and transmitting it. And so, how do they fit together? One is this idea of local generation, local transmission. Generation is somewhat close to the source and has its own dedicated transmission line built by the entity that created it, or a couple of entities, or the other one, and then feeds the grid with its excess power, or the other one, which is where everything comes from the grid, basically, and is generated by utilities along the way. Whether it's a irrigation district, which has got to be a really big nightmare for you to get data from and litter the landscape here in the San Joaquin Valley, but or from an IOU. So that's kind of what I'm thinking there. Not kind of, that is what I'm thinking there.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Yeah, definitely happy to take this conversation offline if you want to. Brief, chat via email, or we can set up a different call. Definitely happy to.
Yeah, Kevin, just real quick, thank you for that. One thing that I would point out, so what we do on our unit does is we model energy demand, but the entire division that we're a part of also has a supply office, and we try to, part of the forecasting work actually incorporates energy supply as well. Perhaps I can be in touch with you and in coordination with Micah, and we can provide some additional information on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm rethinking the suggestion that we continue on much past noon, given the number of folks that we're going to lose and the real value of having agency partners and utilities, as well as the fleets and other stakeholders. I think we lose the well-rounded group if we continue. So I'd like to take one more comment, and then I'll take a few minutes to summarize what we have heard today. And I would like to suggest that we notice and set a date for a continuation of this conversation on this topic, in particular, the grid and electricity, and bring the group back together. So with that, I'll ask Patrick Couch.
Great, thanks everyone. Patrick Couch, Senior Vice President of Technical Services at Gladstein Anderson Associates. We're a clean transportation consulting firm. I see a number of friends and colleagues on the call today, and I think it's a great workshop. One thing I wanted to just mention on timelines, and I have a big outstanding question on this. We've been talking about timelines for build out, for capacity enhancement, for site construction and permitting in the context of what it is today, what the demands for that are today. But as the ACF and ACT and other regulations start requiring broader implementation. We're going to see potentially hundreds or thousands of new service interconnect requests. We're going to see a wave of orders for charging infrastructure. Our experience to date has been that even today, some of these charging EVSE solutions are 12 to 24 months out if you were to order them today. So you look at a 2024 compliance deadline, and it's not clear to me that you can meet that deadline today for some fleets if you haven't already placed your equipment orders. And then on top of that, you know, the utilities have been working very hard to support all of these electrification efforts, but they have limited staff bandwidth. And these aren't simple interconnect requests that we're talking about or service requests. We're talking about complex, high power charging infrastructure, potentially combined with make-ready programs and DER. And I haven't heard any discussion yet about whether the utilities are ready to potentially handle that massive surge of requests and get things processed and energized in a timely fashion. I know they do their best, but they don't have infinite staff resources to accommodate that. So I think those are just constraints that we're projecting based on current experience, not what we really think is coming in terms of peak demand. And I'd appreciate any thoughts that the utilities or others might have on that, and how we should be thinking about, you know, exemptions or allowances in some of these regulatory timelines.
Thank you.
I just sent a message to Patrick. Please be involved when we do a follow-up on this meeting. I think those insights are going to be really necessary. So I'm already starting to plan it.
Any others like to intervene on that? Okay.
I guess I'd like to add to Patrick's comments. We're seeing those constraints already with deployments that we're trying to do for vehicles that we're launching into production this year. So just echoing the message that's been repeated several times, and happy to help with Micah and Quentin at CEC on forecasting models to better plan capacity upgrades. We already work closely with our utility partners with our deployments that we're doing, but yeah, we're happy to help.
I'll third that. We're in the same boat.
Okay. And
this is Vishal from.
Go ahead, Vishal. I'll follow you.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond of, thank you, Patrick, for bringing it up. Appreciate everyone recognizing that the utilities truly do try our best. It's in everyone's best interest to kind of get service as quickly as possible and also safely and reliably. I think, the utilities industry has experienced this at different points in its history. And, I won't go too much into it because I know we will have follow-on sessions, but, when air conditioning was adopted in mass scale in the 70s. So, for interconnections, it was when solar really started to become big about 10, 15 years ago. A lot of our bandwidth and how we manage and the amount of workforce that we have is dictated by limitations that we might have through kind of our general rate case and what's authorized for us by the state of California through the CPUC or others. And so I think we always try to balance that, but that was really the important part for us of the customer outreach sooner than later. And, I like the point that someone made of don't be reactive and wait right till the end of the more data that the utilities have, whether it's us or PG&E or someone else, to say, hey, our customers are reaching out to us and here's a stack full of requests, it's still to be determined exactly what it is. That's additional supporting data that we can provide to ourselves and projecting, but also to the agencies that we work with to say, hey, look, this is what's happening as a result of all policies. We all need to ramp up together to meet the needs. So I'll end there, but just wanted to throw that there. Ervin, thank you for letting me kind of interject there.
Yeah, 2 minutes. And so first off, thank you for pulling this group together. Fascinating dialogue and excellent comments by everybody. I'm so happy to be part of this. I echo what Patrick and also Diego said, and I was going to say something similar. Our fleets are just facing this today. And, one of the points that was made where fleets have to be proactive and go and talk to utilities. our fleets are doing that. We're encouraging them to go talk to the utilities. But the challenge here is when many requests come at the same time, and again, COVID is partly to blame, but hearing 10 to 12 months of wait time, I mean, they're not going to wait for the truck because we're putting trucks 4 to 6 months. Of course, at some point we're going to face supply chain headwinds, and I know we're bracing ourselves for that. But yard art, it's pretty, but then they want the trucks to be running, and they really want to make sure that when they get the trucks, you can actually charge and use them. And right now that is just not working out. So that is one of the big reasons why the fleets are not going ahead and putting out these orders, because it's multiple capital investments, and they're just trying to balance that out. So maybe this could be a good point to pick up the future discussion. And the other thing, I've heard a lot of people talk about renewable source of energy, but I came across this change to the net metering policy where for the residential customers with solar panels, they're not going to be able to get the full benefits in terms of reselling excess energy. So the bring your own power kind of setup, or all these sort of things, how long before it sort of starts hitting the commercial sites that have solar panels and such. So I think there's a little bit of that topic that also I would love that we maybe spend some time and look at it, because it's not just these specific components, but a larger policy issue maybe that needs to change, or that needs to be addressed, because we're already seeing the residential customers starting to get impacted. So thank you.
Thanks for adding to that. I want to take just the last minute or so. This has been a complex conversation, to say the least. The same basic topics that I brought up at the beginning of our two topic areas fed through the comments that we heard around resiliency and reliability, and recognition based on the comments that we heard that this is complex with so many things to consider around backup power, microgrids, consideration of the systemic changes in the grid, not just from transportation. So really appreciate the input that we heard from CEC and CPUC and the utilities. That's helpful. I think there's more to talk about there. I am looking forward to us figuring out how to plan a further extension of this conversation. So look for a work group notice from us. We'll set that up along with a new date for the cost and funding work group meeting that we had planned for next week, but we need to push off for an extra week. And I'll talk with our team about whether we want to have this next meeting be the continuation of this conversation, or whether we jump to the costs and funding and then come back to this. I'm inclined towards the continuing this conversation and then ending our series with the costs and funding. But look for a notice from us through our usual Gov delivery notice process. I want to thank everybody that's been a part of this conversation today. Again, this is super useful to us and hopefully to our participants as well. So with that, I thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to the ongoing conversations here.
Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you all. Hey, Leslie, thanks for accommodating the delays. I'm actually, hiding away in a conference room at the DC Convention Center. I'm at the TRB, so I've just not been able to comment but fascinating panel. Thanks, guys, for pulling this group together.
I appreciate you being involved in continuing. Your input's super important. So
this is a great group you pulled together, and I think this is a very important thing. We're gonna get it right. So
teamwork. We will.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, guys, I'm clocking out too.